Welcome to part 2 of building this VRChat world. We are building this Christmas cabin, and I know it's not Christmas time, or maybe it is Christmas time, but if it's not Christmas time, all this stuff applies to every world. What we're going to be doing in this video is the same process I do in every one of my worlds. And in this video, we are going to be focusing on the Unity stuff. So we've already 3D modeled a world. And if you don't want to watch me for 3 to 4 hours modeling this project, you can start here and still learn everything. But in the last part, we 3D modeled this entire project, and now we exported it out. We're going to create the Unity project, bring this project in, and do everything to get this project ready and upload it to VRChat. I'll link below VRChat documentation if you need help installing the VRChat Creator Companion and installing the proper version of Unity. But right now, as of recording this, VRChat uses Unity version 2022.3.22 F1. So make sure you have that installed. I'll link below those resources if you need it. But now we are going to start with the VRChat Companion. So open that up. We're going to press Create New Project, Worlds 2022, and then let's call this Christmas Cabin Tutorial. And then we're going to pick where you want to save that project. Save it wherever you want. I picked my folder and then press Create Project. This is going to take a second, so wait for this to load. And once it loads, press Open Project. Before we do that, actually, let's just look at some of the options here. By default, the VRChat will import the SDK when you create a project, along with some other stuff that's necessary. There's some other tools in here, like Easy Quest Switch. This is by VRChat, VRWorld Toolkit, things like that, audio link. To add things into your project, you would just come here and press install. You can see I also have Architect's Protv in here. This is a third-party asset that I imported from outside of VRChat. So if you are like bringing in new assets or new prefabs that work with VCC, they should show up here once you download them. That's just an FYI. Let's press Open Project. Once Unity finishes loading, you should see something that kind of looks like this. And for those who this is like your first time opening Unity, I'm going to go over some of the windows and the controls in just a second. But you should see something like this. It'll take a second to load. But once you're here, let's just look at this software. So up here at the top left, you have like all your like menus and stuff. We'll be going into Windows quite a bit. There's some stuff in files we might need. Directly below is your hierarchy. So this is like all the items that are actually in your game or your scene. So if you come to the center, we can see the scene window. This is your game. So we can see that this world, we'll call it world because it's VRChat, but this world has a VRC world game object, which if you click that in the hierarchy, you can see that it's right there in the project. It also has a camera. If we click that in the hierarchy, you can see that it corresponds with the camera in the game or in the world. It also has a directional light, which, we'll go over what all this stuff is, but just to give you some context, it has a floor, which is this object. So if we click in the hierarchy, we can see. Also, if we click an object in the world or in the scene, we'll see it correspond with the object, with it in the hierarchy. So that's hierarchy, that's scene. In the center window, you also have a game tab. This is like what your game camera sees. And if you play the scene by pressing this play button, you will essentially be playing your world. And VRChat comes with a tool that lets you test VRChat worlds in Unity. So you don't actually have to upload stuff to test it in game. In the scene window, up in the top right, there's some more controls here. Here's your gizmos, which kind of like shows icons in the scene. If we turn that off, you can see all these little icons disappear. And then there's some other stuff up here, which we will probably go over at some point. All the way in the right, you should see an inspector. So this is like the settings on the objects that are in your scene. So if I select the floor, you can see that the settings for that object changes here for the floor. These are like your scripts, the coding that makes this object work. So this first script, each one of these is like a different script. This first script references the mesh, like the FBX object that makes this shape. The second one is called the mesh renderer. This is a script that lets the player see this object. Below that is a collision script. This tells the game that the player should collide with this object. And then below this is like the material script, I guess you can think of it. It's the material which shows like what textures and what shaders are used to visualize this object. At the bottom, we have our files. These are like, this is like your Windows Explorer. We have our assets folder and then packages. Packages will have like all the scripts that make your game run. This is like the VRChat stuff is in here. Assets is more like, this will be where all your like project files are organized. This is when we bring in files into this project. This is where we'll be dragging it in. You'll also see probably a console down here. This will tell us if there's any errors with our game. So let's move to the scene window. Let me show you how to navigate. If you right click on the mouse, you can rotate your camera. So the pivot point for this rotation is not like in Blender. This rotates where the camera object actually is. If you use WASD, you can fly around. So I'm right click on the mouse, WASD, and then you can, we're going kind of slow here. If I use the scroll wheel, I can change the speed. And then if I press shift, as if I was like running in a video game, I can go even faster. So scroll wheel, so right click, I can rotate the camera. WASD, I can fly around. Scroll wheel, while I'm pressing down all of these buttons, I can increase the speed of which I'm flying. Using the scroll wheel by itself will let me zoom in and out, and then pressing the scroll wheel will let me drag around the scene. So I can like drag around here, right click, rotate my camera, and then drag this way, right click, grab my camera, go this way. Selecting objects, by default you'll have these like these arrow keys, which is the move tool, so I can like select this object or this object and move it with the arrow keys. If I want to rotate an object, let's grab this plane or the floor here. If we're gonna rotate an object, we can press E. That's the rotate tool. You can also click it right here, and then you can rotate this however you like. Control Z obviously undoes stuff. If you want to scale stuff, you can press R, or you can press the scale tool and you can use the scale function here. So that's just kind of some basics. Let's go ahead and start to bring in some of the stuff that we created. All right, let's drop down to the project, to the assets folder. We're gonna right click in here. We're in the assets folder and we're gonna create a new folder, and I'm going to create a folder. I'm gonna call this, let's just do Christmas cabin tutorial. You can organize your project however you want. I like to put everything in one folder that I bring in. So I just created a folder. That's right click, create folder. I created a folder for this entire project. Let's double click that and go in here. And I'm gonna create a couple more folders. You can drag your stuff in however you want, but this is just how I do it to keep everything organized. I'm gonna create a folder for FBX objects. And then to duplicate this, I can press Control D. And I'm going to create a folder for, I'm going to do textures, but this is going to hold my textures and materials. And then I'm going to create a folder to do, let's do scene. I'm going to create a scene folder. So we already have a scene here, but I don't like to use this scene. This is the, I think VRChat creates the scene and it shows up for you automatically. I don't like using it. I like to create a fresh new scene. So let's go ahead and create one of those. I'm going to double click the scene folder, and in here I'm going to right click in the assets project and press create, and we are going to go down to and try to find scene, which is right here. So we're going to create a new scene, and this is, you can kind of think of this as like a new world, and we're going to call this Christmas cabin tutorial. So in the scene that we have open right now, this is kind of like default VRChatWorld, and we're going to double click this new scene that we just created. Sure, we'll save that. And now this is a brand new world, and this is completely blank scene by default. The only thing that comes in here is the directional light and the main camera. In the assets folder, we were in the scene folder. Let's go back and hit the FBX folder. Let's go ahead and bring in our FBX that we exported. So in the last part, we had finished the tutorial by exporting this entire project out. We are going to now drag that FBX object into our project, or that FBX file into our project. So hit your folder, navigate to where you save that FBX file, and we saved ours right here. So I'm just going to take that and drag that into my FBX folder. And there we go. Now we've got the FBX project, or the file in here. All right, let's drag in this FBX object. We'll drag it into our hierarchy, and this will come in at the same spot that it was in Blender. So if we look in Blender, we can see that 0, 0 is like right there. And in Unity, we can see that if you hit this little button up here, you'll get the grid. Our cursor is at 0, 0, 0, and 0, 0 is in the exact same spot as it was in Blender. When you bring in your FBX objects, they'll come in as prefabs, and that's really useful because a prefabbed object means that if you have multiple instances of that object, you can make a change to one of those objects, and it will affect all the instances of that. By default, all FBX objects comes in as prefabs. This is a little bit different. As an FBX prefab in here, you actually can't make changes to this. It won't let you save directly to the prefab, but creating your own prefabs in here will let you save. And I like to do that with this by creating a new empty object. So just like in the assets folder, when we right click, we can, add things. You can do that in the hierarchy as well. You can right click, and we are going to create an empty object, and we're going to call this cabin base. You can name it whatever you want, but this is just going to be like a parent object to this. And what I like to do is I like to take the prefab FBX object, drag it in here. I strongly advise that you keep this as a prefab, like an FBX prefab, and not if you right click and go down to prefab, you can unpack this, which I typically do with most of my FBXs, but for the base world I don't. That means if we make any changes in Blender and then we save this and override this file in here, by keeping this a prefab, it should update properly. If you unpack this prefab and make it its own like instance or game object, you'll have issues overriding this file. So I keep this as a prefab in here, and then I make my own prefab. So I put this object under a parent object, which we've created here, and then we're going to go back to this folder, and we're going to right click, create folder, and I'm going to create a folder called prefabs. Double click this, grab this cabin base, this parent object, and drag this in here, and this will let us create a new prefab. So I can kind of show you what a prefab does now. If I select this prefab that we just created and press Shift D, duplicate, and then let's say I right click, add a cube, and this is just for demonstration purposes. So now there's a cube in here. If I come over here and press override, apply all, you can see that that cube is now applied to the other prefab. So that's why it's super useful. We created this by adding in an empty object, and I will be creating several empty objects just to organize my hierarchy. So let's create another one. Let's right click in the hierarchy, create empty. We're going to call this prefabs. And then this is just a parent object that I can organize everything in my hierarchy. And let's create another one. Let's do right click, create empty, and we will call this one lights. And then I'm going to use this empty object to organize all the lights I bring in here. So I'm just going to grab that directional light, which was in there by default, and drag it under the lights game object. The next thing that we have to do, which I imagine is obvious, is we need to get all of our textures and create our materials and actually like make this look like this. In the last part, I mentioned that I am sharing a folder with all the project files in here. If you need that, you can download that below. That's also linked. In that folder, it's a zip file. You should see it's probably this file. This may change depending on how this tutorial goes, but I'm pretty sure it'll more or less be everything that's in here. In here, you'll see the textures that we used for this log cabin when we made it in Blender. So these are the files that we need to drag into our textures folder. So let's go in here, let's double click textures, navigate to where those textures are. We're gonna select everything here, and then let's just drag it in. This should be everything. I see that this is everything and a little bit more. I included some of the stuff from the main project that I don't think we're using in here, but that's okay. We need to make materials with each one of these textures. I don't believe we used this folder, so I'm going to delete that. Each one of these folders contains textures, and these textures will go onto materials. Materials are what will be applied to all the objects here, and the material will tell which FBX object uses, or which mesh uses what textures, and how that is displayed to the player. So let's just start with cabin bark. In here, in the folders, we're going to right click, create material, and so now we'll have a new material here. We'll call this cabin bark. So all of these textures correspond with the textures that we used in the Blender project. in here, these were exported, or many of these were exported to work with this Unity standard shader. So we are just going to take each one of these and drag it onto the proper corresponding slots. So for the main color, we'll go to the albedo. The metallic smoothness will go to the metallic smoothness slot, and then the normal will go to the normal map slot. Most of these are going to be like that. Just like in Blender, you had to like tell the program that the normal map is a normal map. You got to do the same thing in here. You can do that by clicking Fix Now, or you can select the normal map. And in the inspector, you can kind of see the settings for it. You can go to texture type, click that, and go to normal map. We will do that in a second. What I like to do when I'm creating my materials is compress my textures. When you're when you're creating a world, the thing that will increase the file size for your VRChat world the most is textures. So I like to kind of look at my textures and see how large they are in Unity. If we select this one, go into the inspector, and you should see something that down here, and it will tell you how large this file is. Sometimes this is all the way down, and there'll be something like this. You just click and drag that up. So we can see that this one texture is 2.7 megabytes. We can compress that. I think each one of these is probably, so this one's 5.3 megabytes, and this one is 2.7. We can compress all this so that these three textures don't take up like 5 or 10 megabytes of your world. We're gonna select all of this. If we go to default, this is our compression settings. We can compress this to be a smaller size, which we may not need to do for this. We're going to keep it at 2K. We can use something called crunch compression, which is very useful for bringing down texture sizes. So we're going to do that. In addition, we are going to compress this for Android because we are going to be uploading this to Quest. If you do not have an Android option here, you need to go to File, Build Settings, click Android, and there should be a prompt for you to download the Android version of Unity. So if you need to, download that and then come back to this. But I have it installed, obviously. So we're gonna select all the textures, come over here, go to your compression settings. We're gonna use crunch compression, go to the Android version. We're gonna press override for Android. And because Android, we need there's a file size limit. I sometimes will just go ahead and decrease the max size by default. And a great format for textures on Android is any one of these compressed ASTC 4x4s. Make sure you're not using the HDR because that will like brighten the texture a bit. It can make things look weird, but this RGBA compressed ASTC 4x4 block is a good option. The higher the number you use, like 12x12, 10x10, 8x8, the lower the file size for the project or for the texture will be, and it will compress it even more, and you'll lose some like detail the higher you go. But just so you know, if you're like struggling with file size, if you were doing 6x6, 8x8 might be a good option for you. For our sake, let's just choose 6x6, and then we need to apply these options. We're going to press apply, and now because we've compressed it, I am going to go select the material and do normal map, fix now. And we're going to do that for every texture in here. So we've created this first material using the Unity standard shader. You can get other shaders. These textures are exported from Substance Painter specifically for Unity standard. So this is the shader we're going to use, but changing the shader will change kind of how this is visualized to the player. So this is the cabin bark material. We're going to drag this to where the cabin bark is supposed to be on. So it's going to be on this object here. You can see just dragging this and applying it onto here does the trick. If I were, don't do this, but just to visualize for the new people, if I wanted to change how this looked, I could choose a different shader. So let's use unlit texture. And now this only takes into account the albedo texture and it's unlit. So it's kind of like an emissive almost. And that changes quite a bit how this looks. Let's do something else. VRChat, let's do mobile. Standard light is there, or let's do toon light. So this is kind of the exact same thing. VRChat mobile. Standard light is their mobile version of this. You'll want to increase all this to be max to follow whatever the instructions this texture is giving to it. So this is like VRChat's Unity standard. For this, we are going to continue to use standard. And we're going to do that for all the textures. So that's one material down. Let's go to the next one. Cabin planks. So if you remember, this is like this texture here. So let's right click, create material. We'll call this cabin planks. We're going to drag the albedo to the albedo, metallic smoothness to metallic smoothness, normal to normal. We need to compress these. So let's select all these textures. We will just use crunch compression, override for Android. We'll bring it down one, do 8 by 8 and apply. And now let's go back to the material, fix now for the normal map. And now that's another material down. We can drag this into our scene. The bark is going to go in even more places than where so we just kind of like need to drag this and put this everywhere it needs to go. And there's probably more, which we will figure out as we go. So do this with each one of these textures. Before we finish this off, let me show you. We're going to look at the paving stone texture. This is a little bit different than, oops. This is a little bit different than the other textures. The paving stone texture is an asset I got from the from Ambient CG, which is a great free texture site. Ambient CG supplies us a bunch of stuff. Well, actually, let's not look at paving stones because paving stones we're not ready for. Let's look at tree end. Tree end is an asset I got from Ambient CG. This is not set up Unity standard shader, so let's right click, create material. Let's just call this tree end. This has an albedo, so we can drag that into the albedo. It has a normal, so we can drag that into normal, but it doesn't have a metallic smoothness. It has a roughness. So if we were to, let's drag the tree end to where that should go, so that should go right there. If I were to take the roughness and put it on metallic, it's just not going to look right because this texture isn't providing metallic smoothness information. I'm going to press Ctrl Z. What we need is a shader that allows us to use a roughness map. So let's go to shader and let's use one that I know that is default in Unity that will allow us to use a roughness map is Autodesk Interactive. If I select that, you can see that now we don't have a metallic smoothness. Now we have a metallic map and a roughness map. We can take this roughness map and put it the roughness. And now we should have the appropriate roughness information from this roughness map. So all we changed was the shader. Now with this, we need to compress this just like we've been compressing. We're going to use crunch compression, go to Android. Maybe we'll downgrade this just like I did and apply. So that compresses everything. And then we need to make sure that the Unity knows that this is a normal map. So we'll go to normal map, apply. And so that's that texture. So depending on the texture, most of the stuff is like kind of up to you if you want to change the shader to just something that you prefer. All of these are exported to use Unity Standard, so I recommend you use Unity Standard. I'm going to go through all of these and create materials and assign the textures to those materials. A cool trick is I can select multiple folders and then I can select all the textures all at once and compress them all at once. So make sure you change the format for Android and apply. Okay, now I'm going to go through and create materials for every one of these textures. Once that's completed, we should have materials for each one of these objects. I skipped paving stone because this is going to be on the terrain only. Terrain uses materials a bit differently. And then snow, I only put in the normal map because snow is always a little weird. Like this texture, I think kind of looks a little weird, so we might manipulate it a little bit. But now that we have all the materials, we need to assign it to our log cabin. I'm going to do that trick where I'm going to go into this little drop down folder area and I'm going to select the top one, hold shift and select all these folders. So now we can see all the materials all in one go. And we can just start grabbing these and putting them onto our objects. So here's the planks. We can put planks there. And then I know I need planks here. And this grid is kind of annoying. So I'm going to turn that off by hitting this button right here. We're going to drag planks. Where else do we need planks? Right here. And this corresponds with what we did in here. So I'm just kind of putting the materials where I know they should go. And you should know where they go because you built this, I'm assuming. You built it with me. So planks go there. What else do we need? Cabin planks. Cabin planks should go here. I think that's good. Doors and windows should go here. And this should go there. Let's see, where are there other windows? Right there. So remember that door, these windows are some of the assets that I provided, so this material should work on them. And then we've got this wood. Wood should go there. And then the wood will also go there. And here. Tree end should go right on this. Planks. What else am I missing? Wood, it should go there. This should be cabin bark, cabin planks. And it looks like we almost got it. Snow should go on this. Snow should go on that. Painted wood is the edges here. How's that look? Oh, it looks like we need some tree end right here. And I think we've got it. The only thing that we're missing, if I go to textures, is the glass material. Unity knows that this is supposed to be a glass material, so it looks like it's applied that, but it's kind of made its own thing. And this also needs the snow, so let's drag the snow on there. And you can see the ones that we haven't applied yet are kind of grayed out, but now that we just applied the snow, you can see that it is no longer grayed out. It's using the material that we created, and it looks like we got to do that for each one of the windows. You can see snow is grayed out, so we drag the snow onto where the snow is supposed to go. Now it's on there, and we need to create a glass material. So let's right click, create material. We'll call this glass. We're going to use Unity Standard. We're going to use this drop down mode to make it transparent, and then we will I'll bring the metallic up. We'll click this color. We'll use a dark color, and down here is the alpha value. We can drag the alpha down, and the smooth, this needs to be as smooth as we can make it, and I think that'll be good for glass. It can sometimes be hard to apply glass because it'll want to like apply to other stuff. If you click the object you're trying to apply the glass to, you can go to the mesh render, hit this drop down, and we can see the glass is element 1. We can drag the glass and put it right there, and that will apply it just the same. And I think that's everything. Let's update our prefab for this object. So if we hit the prefab object here, we can go to overrides in the inspector, hit this drop down, and press apply all. I just did Control Z. If we don't do that, if we go to our prefabs and drag this in, you can see that none of the materials are applied to it. So let's delete that. Apply all, drag this in. Now the prefab has all the textures on there, which is exactly what we want. Next, we will add a spawn point to this. So when you create a new VRChat project through the Creator Companion, it adds the SDK on there. Knowing, if you have the SDK in, you should see this SDK, VRChat SDK at the top. This should already be done because we created it through the VCC. Part of the SDK is several prefabs to help you build your world. Oh, it looks like we missed something. Hold on. Textures. Part of the SDK are several prefabs that help you build the world. One of the prefabs that they provide is the VRCWorld prefab. This prefab, it will have all the information that your world needs. So like the descriptor, which is like the serial code to your world. It'll also have like movement information for the player. It will be your spawn point for the world. So to find that, we can search VRCWorld, and you need to make sure that you search in packages, because that's where it's going to be at, and we can come down here and try to find it, and it's this object right here, VRCWorld. So let's take that, we're going to drag that in and put that somewhere, and we're just going to try to we'll just put it somewhere in the middle of the world, just so that the player is in here somewhere. The player, when this object is in your world, the player, when they spawn in, will be spawning in facing the direction of Z, which is this blue arrow. If you want to change the direction that the player faces, you can rotate this, and you can also see this blue line here that also indicates. And the reason why our Unity arrows are pointing in the same direction is because we have the direction set to local. If we change this to global, it would match the Z, X, Y direction of the world, which in the world, Z is in this way, Y is this way. But because we have it set to local now, it's showing the direction of the object we have selected. So let's make the player spawn looking this way. We'll have them right here. Another thing that the SDK comes with is Client Simulator. So Client Sim If this is checked on, we'll let you play the scene in Unity. All you have to do to play this, to test this out, is press this play button. So let's go ahead and do that and see what happens. So we're playing the scene just like you would in VRChat, and we're just falling through the world. The reason we are falling through the world is because we never told the program that the player should collide with anything. We actually need to physically select the objects and tell the game that the player needs to collide with those objects. So let's exit play mode, and let's start doing that. To begin with, let's select this floor. And we've got, these are just some simple planes. We're gonna press add component. This is gonna be kind of like adding another script onto this object. So we're selecting this interior floors object, and we're gonna call, we need to find a script that will let the player detect this object as as something that they should collide with. You don't have to code this out yourself. These scripts are already created. Let's search for collider. And so you can see there's all these collision scripts. We are going to use a mesh collider for this object. That means that the player should collide with this mesh, and the collision should match the shape of this mesh. So let's select mesh collider. And now if we play the scene, you can see the player is now not falling through the world exactly like we want it. But there's no collider with the wall. There's no collider with the stair step. There's no colliders with this, and if I walk out here, I'll fall because there's no collider with that. So let's add more colliders. We can select this. This is kind of a complicated shape, and I don't recommend you use mesh colliders with this. Okay, so the thing is with the mesh collider is that when the player uses a mesh collider, the program is saying, hey player, interact with all the vertices on this mesh. And this mesh is just 2 planes, so it's like 8 vertices, which is not a lot of vertices. It's fine to have a mesh collider on this. But if you were to put a mesh collider on a 50,000 vertice object, that means the player is going to touch it, and the program's going to go, oh, this player is now interacting with 50,000 vertices, which can cause a lot of lag. So when you get to more complex shapes like this, or like this, or like this, I don't recommend you use a mesh collider. There are other collider options. So if we go here, we can press add component, and instead of using a mesh collider, we can use a box collider, which is going to put a box collider over the entire object. You can edit this by pressing this button here, edit bounds, and you'll get these little dots, and you can move these dots so that the player will only interact with this box. So we could try to shape this, and then maybe we could add a couple more and kind of just shape it to be what the shape we want it to be. This can be kind of difficult and is not the best method. Mesh collider is fine for this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Blender. Yes, that means we are 3D modeling some more. We are going to go back into Blender, and we are going to create a collision mesh. So this is a very low poly mesh that we can put a mesh collider on that will be the collision for all these objects. You do this so you don't have to put mesh collision on your high poly meshes. So let's close out of this. Let's move into Blender and create a collision mesh. Okay, we're back in Blender. I'm going to assume that you watched the last part and that, you've got some controls down. I've turned screencast keys back on, so at the bottom left, you can try to follow along. We are going to create this collision mesh. We're going to try to do this quickly. We're not going to do the walls. We'll do a mesh collider on the walls, which is a bit overkill, and I don't recommend it, but for the sake of speed in this tutorial, we will ignore it. Let's start out here. So we're going to just shift right click. We're in object mode. We're going to do shift A, mesh, cube, and we're going to create some very, very simple meshes here. So let's, in edit mode, scale this down. We're going to try to match the shape of this. Press shift Z for wireframe. Grab that face. Let's drag it over. And we are just going to go through and size this to be the size of all these objects. Now we've got the stairs here, so we can press E to extrude. We're going to drag this down and maybe something like that. This doesn't have to be perfect. It can be very, what's the word I'm looking for, like crude. Even though this stuff doesn't match perfectly, if the player runs into this, their brain is going to go, oh, this stair, like I'm on the stairs now. And we're not going to do this in a bunch of different objects. We're going to do this all in one object. So that's the front stairs done. We're going to do maybe Shift A, cube, and we'll scale this down. And we'll do something like this. So this is going to be the collision for the railing. We'll grabbing this face. G, we're going to do E to extrude, bring this down. Something like that should work. Going back to solid view. Actually, let's go to the material view. Shift D, duplicate, drag this over. And I'm going to do Control R. I'm going to grab an edge loop. 3 for face select. And E to extrude, bring this up. And then another one over here. E to extrude, bring this up. So that's basically the front porch. I'm gonna steal some meshes from some of the other stuff. So let's grab this roof and I'm gonna just press edge select. I'm gonna hover over this object, L to select that whole thing, L to select that, and then L to select this. And I'm just trying to get these roof meshes. And then we're gonna do Shift D to duplicate, right click to bring it back to its starting point, P to separate this by selection, go back into object mode. And so now you should have this. We're going to remove all the materials from this by going to the material tab. Let's join it with our collision mesh. And so now we should have, oop, I forgot to get it from here. So let's duplicate this as well. So Shift D, right click, P, separate by selection, remove all, oops, that's not what I wanted. Let's make sure we only grab the part that we want, remove all the materials, join it to our collision mesh. And now I can use this as the collision for the roof. And this might be, we'll have to test this because the player collider needs to be able to come up here and walk into this area. And this roof might be a bit low, or this one might be. So we could maybe drag this up, bring it up a little bit higher, just to give them more space. So we'll play with that as we need to. This object we could add a mesh collider to. It's not too bad. So let's grab our collision mesh. We need to continue. Let's build the collision mesh out here. So I'm going to shift right click, bring my cursor out here, Shift A. Let's bring in another cube. And let's in edit mode. We added that object in edit mode because we want everything to be like connected there. Only select this, and let's just quickly 3D model by grabbing these faces, moving it around, 3D model something that will work out here. And we're gonna add in an edge loop, selecting this face, E to extrude, drag this down. That's gonna be for the stairs there. So still in edit mode, we're gonna add in another cube, and we are gonna try to create the collision for this railing. And we're gonna just drag that over there. Control R, add an edge loop, grab this face, E to extrude. We're going to Shift D to duplicate, bring it over along the Y-axis, E to extrude. Maybe press L over this whole thing, Shift D to duplicate, and R to rotate. Press 7 for the straight down view, and we are just going to, you know, we've got a lot of this going so far. Still in edit mode, right click, we're going to do cube, and we're going to do these post. Duplicate, Shift D, and this can be very simple. E to extrude, drag that way, and we're gonna select just these 4 faces. Shift D to duplicate, drag this way. Fill the ends because you don't want players colliding with back faces at all. Okay, so we've got this deck, we've got the front deck. We need to do the upstairs and the stairs, and I think that'll be it. So let's add in another cube. We're going to scale this down, try to match it with the floor, place it to the best of our ability. We're going to drag it out, grabbing these faces, pressing G to move stuff around. Just going to model this out to be the same size as this top balcony. And I added an edge loop. We're going to extrude this part out, and now we could extrude this out and try to match this with the stairs to the best that we can. Maybe E to extrude, so that could be that platform. E to extrude, and that will be that. So how many, if we go into edit mode, press A, we can select this entire mesh. We can come up here and go to stats and see that this is 412 triangles, which is not bad. Just for context, like the collision mesh in the black cat is like 3 or 4,000 vertices or something. You don't have to be super careful. I mean, this is a pretty small world, so we shouldn't need too much. Just don't go too crazy. So there's that. Let's just duplicate this, bring this over. We'll bring in another cube, and we'll scale this down, scale it in the X. And I think this stairs is going to be the last of it. We'll E to extrude to make this post. E to extrude, E to extrude. E to extrude, drag this down, do the best that you can. And I'm just pressing G and E to extrude. Very simple. E to extrude, do something like that. Maybe grab this edge loop, drag this back. We got it to the bottom as well. And I'm going to drag this part all the way down because I believe this is part of that as well, and I don't want to put any collision on there. And we can just duplicate this, E to extrude it, bring it to the other side, and then E to extrude, drag this down, something like that. Last cube, R to rotate, grab this, something like that will probably work. You don't have to be perfect. It can be very not perfect, like this is. That's a bit too not perfect, I think. You could do something like that. There we go. So I just like moved it forward, and this should be enough. We'll put a mesh collider on the walls, and then we'll put a mesh collider on the ceilings. Oh, maybe not these ceilings, because we want the player to be able to go through this just in case they don't have enough room here. So we'll just do the walls, and then that means we need to select our collision mesh, go back into edit mode, and create one more wall here. So we're doing this quickly. If you miss anything, you can go ahead and, make the collision mesh for anything that we miss. But I think for our purposes, this will be good. E to extrude, let's drag this up. S to scale on the Y. And I think we should be good with this. So now we need to export this out and override the FBX in our Unity. We had separated this into different collections just to organize. We're going to make sure that our collision mesh object, which is this cube, is in our collection for the base of this world. We're going to rename this and call this, I don't know, collider, or like collision mesh. It doesn't really matter. We don't need to UV map this or do anything. Now we just need to export this whole thing out. So everything that's a part of this base world is in this collection. So we're going to just select the top object, shift, select the entire bottom, just like we did at the end of part 1. We're going to go to File, Export, FBX. We're going to press Selected Objects, Mesh, and we're going to go to Unity, and we're going to navigate to our Assets folder, Christmas Cabin Tutorial, FBX, navigate to where that FBX file is, and overwrite this file. And because this is still an FBX, like prefab in this prefab that we made, it should overwrite properly. So let's go back to Blender and export FBX. And now let's go to Unity and see how that worked. And it looks like it worked good because now we can see our mesh, our collision mesh that we had modeled. So we can select this and we can press Add Component, Mesh Collider, add a mesh collider to that. And because we don't want the player to actually see this mesh, we don't want to like turn the whole mesh off. We just need to say the player should not render this. So we can come over here. You can see the collider, you can see that the mesh filter script is selecting our collider mesh, which is the information for like the shape of this object. Below is what the player actually sees. And we can uncheck this and basically tell the program, hey, don't show the player this object. Right? We want the object in the world, we just don't want the player to see it. We want it in the world, we want the player to interact with it, but we don't want the player to see it. And so now we have our collision mesh in here. Let's add the mesh collider to the other objects that we talked about, which I think was just the walls. And now we can test this out to make sure that our collision mesh is doing exactly what we want it to do. So let's press that play button and use the client sim to test this world. Walking around, I should be able to walk on here, walk down there. Perfect. And we should be able to walk upstairs. And now we can test to see if the player can actually get through this space, and the player can, so this is perfect. And this feels good. I think this is exactly what we wanted. Player should be able to jump on here. So now, you know, the player is interacting with all those objects that have the colliders on it, which is our collision mesh. And like this is a mesh collider on the floor, and we've put a mesh collider on the walls, and it all looks good. Perfect. Okay, now I think the next step for us is going to be bringing in all the props that we want. So if you have a world and you want to bring in props, you can find props at many different places like the Unity Asset Store, maybe Sketchfab. You just want to, you know, Unity Asset Store or Unity Asset Store booth, stuff that's specifically for VRChat. Stuff like that will probably be good and easy to bring into your project. For this project, lucky for you, I have created a Unity package that will contain all the props that you could want for this project. I'm going to show you how to import that. This is going to be very similar to if you've got an asset off of booth.pm, or if you downloaded something from the Unity Asset Store. You'll probably get something if you go to that share folder that I gave you. There'll be a folder in there called Unity Package. For anything that you bring in, you'll probably, that's Unity or VRChat specific, you'll probably have a Unity package. And to bring this in, all we have to do is double click this asset, drag it into your project. So we're just going to drag it in. It's going to load. It's going to say, hey, look, this is all the stuff that you're about to import into your project. Do you want to do that? We're going to say yes. If you make your own FBXs or your own meshes, you would bring it in the exact same way that we just brought this in, but for assets that you download, it will come in kind of like this. And so let's quickly go through this Unity package. This is containing a bunch of assets that I created specifically for this project. So it's got a whole bunch of Christmas stuff. It has particles for the world. It has textures, things that we're kind of, you know, not going to go over because it would take way too long to explain everything. It's got some custom VRChat scripts. We are not going to be going over animations. We are going to create some particles, but it's going to be very simple stuff. But this Unity package will provide all the assets for the stuff that we are going to go over, and along with a bunch of like props that you can throw around in the world. So let's press import. Once that's done importing, we can navigate to that file. So assets Christmas cabin is what I called it. So the folder we created for the tutorial is Christmas cabin tutorial. This is assets Christmas cabin. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, animations, like FBX files for the objects that I have. For the props, you can go to prefabs and you just kind of come in here and just start dragging stuff in. You can go crazy with this. It does seem like there's some stuff that's having some issues. It looks like it can't really find our snow material, or maybe it's just using the wrong shader. So you can just come and change the shader for stuff like that. But with everything else, you can just, you know, go crazy with it. We'll go crazy a little bit. The important thing is the fireplace. So I'm going to find that fireplace object in prefabs, and we're just going to drag that in. And it should, each one of these objects will have like collision or some animations, like the doors are also important. So let's just kind of go through here and apply what we need. So starting with the fireplace, where you kind of just brought that in. We are going to place this to the best of our ability. Luckily, I've got these like little posts here I can kind of use as a guide. So I know that this is supposed to be a bit, and then we can kind of drag this down to a spot that I think looks good. I think that looks good. We'll keep that there. Oh, maybe we'll bring it up just a little bit. So that looks good. What else? What else should we do? I've got this cabinet here. We can bring this in and put this up against the wall. And then I've got, what else do I have here? I've got this thing, and I'm actually gonna scale both of these by, no, not that way. Maybe this way. No, not that way. -1. There we go. That way the sink isn't like up against the wall. Let's rotate that. So I'm selecting these objects. I'm using the arrow key to move stuff around. I can press E to get that rotate tool that I was talking about earlier. So E to rotate. I'm holding control to snap rotate, just like in I think Blender is like that also. I always forget like the hotkeys until I'm like actually doing it. But I'm gonna go through here and I'm gonna just take prefabs from in this project and fill up my world. I've got the Christmas tree here. I've got the Christmas train here. We'll put that right there like that. Maybe we'll press R and we'll scale this. And we're just gonna go through all these props. And we're just gonna put this stuff in here. And like stuff like this, you can, you know, scale it by -1 to like change, like to mirror it if you need to. But real quick, I'm gonna go through and I'm just gonna put these props in here. You can do it however you want. If you want to throw stuff all over the place or skip ahead just to move on with the tutorial, it's up to you. But there's a bunch of stuff in here. I recommend that you put some lights down. Also, something important that might help you is up here in the top right, there's this little light bulb. If you click that off, so this will like brighten up the whole scene, but if you click it on, it will use the lights that are in the scene to like reflect what the world actually looks like. So we've got our light here, so you can see that it's affecting the world. If we hit this light bulb, turn it off, we can see that this, you know, we no longer see that. So that's kind of what that does. So if you're having issues seeing, you can turn the lights off, which is what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to speed through. I'm going to fill this world up with a bunch of stuff. Also, I guess before I go any further, you should, there's some stuff like the TV has a missing shader. That's because Protv isn't in. We will get to that. So feel free to put the TV somewhere. We will get to importing a video player for you to use. Okay, so go crazy, fill your world. Okay, so I've placed a bunch of props everywhere. This is not like exact to how I had it set up in the uploaded version. It's a bit different. And I also didn't include every asset from there. Some of the stuff I did not include, but I just threw stuff everywhere. The important stuff I wanted to throw in some lights. There is an asset for this woods, which we'll need when we create the particles for the fire. And then I left out the doors because I wanted to do the doors without like speeding through it. So let me find the door object. So it's right here. This door object has some stuff on it. It's got an animator. The player should be able to click it. It also links to some door sounds. So when you click it, this is the script I use for all my doors everywhere. If you click it, the door should open and you should hear a little noise, and we're going to do our best to place this right in the center of the door spots. So maybe something like this, and it's clipping with the top there, but I think that's fine. That looks good. And then we are going to drag in another one and put it right, and we can see, so you got the hinges are on this side, so this door is going to open up into the house and to the left, which I want it to kind of go to the right, but I want it to open in. To fix that, I can just flip this by scaling it on the Z, and then we can rotate this 180 degrees. So that's R, rotate, hold control to snap it, and now once we've flipped it, we can place it. And I'm just gonna do like the best of my ability, try to get in here. And now the front door, I want to put the Christmas wreath on it. So I'm just gonna place it. Maybe we'll press R and scale this a little bit. And I'm just going to place this on the door where I want it. That's a bit big. Maybe something like that. This door animates open, so we need to actually put it on the object that animates open. So I'm going to so this is our wreath object. This is our door object, the object that is animated and that will open when the player clicks on it. So we need to take this and make it a child of this object. So now if this door opens, it moves with it. So for now, that is the objects. We are going to organize our hierarchy a little bit because we added in a whole bunch of prefab. So we're going to select all these objects, hold shift, left click, and drag it under prefab. And now that just, that didn't change anything, but it did make our hierarchy look way cleaner. Moving on now, we are looking at this cabin, and it is the vibe is just, it's not quite there yet. And we can help with the vibe situation by we go to the assets folder. I have included a Skybox in here that you could use. And we're going to hit textures, and we're going to navigate to the folder that says Skybox. And in here, there is a Skybox texture. And this texture is on a material that is using a Skybox shader. And that means we can take this material and just drag it onto the Skybox, and that will change. Look at that. Now it's kind of not so bright no more. In the live version, I use an asset from a creator named RedSim, and their asset is called Beautiful Skies. This is a paid asset. I believe you have to be a $5 patron to them. If you are interested in that asset and want that beautiful sky shader that they made, and I use it in like every world, to be honest. I use it all the time. I will link that below if you're interested in that. But for the tutorial, this is the Skybox I rendered in Blender and that I am giving to you for free. Okay, next is the terrain. We are going to be focusing on creating the terrain. To create a terrain, you need to go into the hierarchy, right click 3D object instead of, we've right clicked and gone to empty, but this time we're going to do 3D object. And in here, there's a whole bunch of options. We are going to go to terrain. We've got this giant terrain, and this is really big. If you come all the way into the inspector while you have the terrain selected, you can change this terrain quite a bit. The first column, this little tab here, it has a bunch of settings for the terrain. We are going to start here and scroll down and go all the way to terrain width and length, and we're going to change this to something a bit more manageable, like 250 by 250. And that makes this square much smaller. Our arrow keys are in this right corner because that is the pivot point for this object. And we have our selection mode on pivot. I'm going to change it to center, which is going to put our cursor or the arrow keys in the center of the objects that we have selected. This is going to make things much easier for me in regards to moving this terrain. And I'm going to just drag this and try to make this terrain center on our cabin. Now let's begin sculpting. Let's just try to get comfortable with the terrain. Sculpting can be kind of confusing. I'm going to show you how I usually sculpt terrains, which I think is a good method just for demonstration purposes, or actually follow along. We are going to go to the paint terrain tab, and in here there's this drop down that has a whole bunch of stuff. We are going to start, so there's stamp terrain, raise and lower, set height, paint holes, smooth height, paint textures. We are going to go to raise and lower terrain. And now if I've got like this brush, and I've got a brush size, and I've got opacity on like how strong. If I were to bring that down, you can see that it kind of like visualize how high it's going to go. It doesn't really matter for now. We are going to just paint something. Look at that. Very difficult, very weird. So that's just me left clicking on the terrain, painting some stuff. It's pretty strong, and this can make things pretty difficult, but we'll work with it. It won't be that hard, trust me. Just follow along. So left click will paint to raise the terrain. If you hold shift, you can lower the terrain. So I'm just holding shift and I'm lowering the terrain a little bit. You can see I'm clicking, and now it's like really strong. If I bring the opacity down a bit, it's a bit more manageable, but it's still pretty difficult. If you notice, if you hold shift and right click, you'll notice that you can't lower the terrain any lower than this. I think there's a setting to change that, but it's really annoying. And I'm going to change it in a different way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to paint texture, and I'm going to bring this up really high, something like that. And now we're going to come over here to the drop down, and we're going to do set height, and then I'm going to choose that option. And this, I can like, where my mouse is, I can like choose a height to set as like the max, and then I can hold shift, right click. So this height is now the max height for the object. And now if I click anywhere, bring the opacity up, it's going to bring my objects up to that height and only that height. It won't go any higher. It won't go any higher than that. And that's what I want. For now, we are going to increase the brush size, increase the opacity, and we are going to bring this whole thing up to that height. Perfect. Now let's press W to go back to the arrow keys, and we are going to take this object and drag it all the way down. And let's have it intersect the log cabin just a little bit. But this way, now if we go back to raise and lower, let's bring the opacity way down and the brush size. If I hold shift, I can now like paint into the terrain. So I can go up and down, up and down. Perfect. Exactly what I want. But now let's get to what should we do? There's lots to do. Let's get to raising this terrain. So I'm gonna bring the brush size up, and I'm gonna just kind of focus on getting the. We're not gonna do like hills yet. We're just gonna like I want the terrain to kind of go up at an angle like this, like this log cabin's on a hill, if that makes sense. To do that, we're gonna raise this side of the log cabin and lower this side. We're gonna make sure our opacity is as low as it can go. We might do a little bit. No, that's fine. And we're just gonna simple one clicks. We're on raise and lower, and click, and click. Very simple. Don't go too much. We're just gonna raise this up a little bit, and you can see that it's kind of clipping through inside. That's all right. And then over here, we're going to do shift, and we're just going to bring this down very slowly. And it looks like we maybe brought it a bit too much down there. Very slowly, we're going to bring this down. Maybe something like that. We want this part to be a bit higher. Maybe I'll bring the brush down a little bit, and we'll bring this up. Maybe over here is a bit higher. And I'm just clicking and sculpting. It looks like shit, but it's fine. Because we're going to fix it. I'm just clicking and sculpting. We'll do something like that. It's going to look very spiky, very weird. And maybe we'll do shift over here. Shift click. Just sculpt it, you know? Easy. So you should have something that is kind of visually representing what you were thinking, but also kind of looks like garbage. You're on the right track. So now we are going to go down to smooth height, and we are going to increase the opacity, and now we are just going to smooth this whole thing. Let's do opacity 100 and smooth this whole thing. If you go to the settings here, I recommend that you use a resolution that is not that big. We're using 1024. If we do like 512, that might make smoothing a bit easier. So let's go back to the paint textures. We're on smooth height and detail resolution of your texture. You don't want it too big, otherwise sculpting and smoothing gets really difficult and really annoying. I'm just smoothing this out, and now we are going to look at this and see how I did. How does it clip in here? It clips in here pretty bad, but this may not be an issue, or it might be. I don't like how high this is, so back in the paint, we are going to go back to raise and lower, and then we're going to make sure we bring the opacity all the way down, and then up here we're going to do shift. We're just going to bring this down a little bit, and then we'll go back to smooth, opacity all the way up. When I'm sculpting, it's a whole lot of this. It's a whole lot of going back and forth between smooth height and raise and lower. So now we can see that most of the terrain is not clipping with this. We can still bring this down a little bit more. Raise and lower again. Bring the opacity all the way down. Hold shift. Let's kind of drop this stuff down a little bit. Raise opacity. Go to smooth height. Let's smooth it out. I want the fireplace to be like in the snow. I don't like how there's this bottom part that's kind of exposed. So let's go to raise and lower. Let's bring the brush down, opacity all the way down. We're just gonna kind of bring this up. Maybe the snow is like built up to the wall like that. Maybe we'll bring it up over here. We have to be careful because it's gonna it's gonna clip inside. So we're just gonna bring it up a little bit, and then we're gonna go back to smooth height, bring the opacity up, and smooth this out. How's that looking now? That's much better. And how's it looking in here? Not much better. So there's some stuff we can do here. We could, is that clipping it out? No, it's in there. Okay, it's good. Unity Terrain has a great tool here called Paint Holes, and this will let me paint out parts of inside of this wall. Now you have to be careful because you might be painting out parts of outside, and it looks like we're not. So we're going to use this to just kind of paint some of this out. So you can see we're painting too much. We can see there's a hole there now. We don't want, where the player is going to see, we don't want a hole there. So it looks like we're going to have to do some manipulating right here, but everything else we can paint out. If you mess up, you can hold shift and undo it. Otherwise, just left click and paint out what you don't want. Doesn't really seem like there's an issue. This is how I do basements, is I just kind of paint holes in the terrain what the player is going to be. And I think for the tutorial's sake, this is good. Now let's focus on this little bit here that's kind of in our way. We're going to bring the brush size all the way down, and we are going to bring our opacity down. Instead of going back to raise and lower, we are going to use that set height tool again. And let's set the height to let's hold shift, left click to right there. So that's our height. And now if I click on this, it will drop down to that height that we had set, and that will make things that way we can kind of hide where this intersects with the interior. And I think that's good. And now we can focus on the rest of the terrain. I want this to drop down like I had said, so we're going to use the set height. We're going to increase this, and then we're going to find the lowest point down here and maybe hold shift, right click, choose that, and now I can just lower this to that point, something like that. And then we can go to raise and lower, opacity all the way down. Brush size doesn't really matter. Oops, let's make sure we're on terrain. Let's make sure we're on paint terrain. Hold shift, and let's drop this down a little bit, something like that. And then we can go back to set height, bring the opacity up, hold shift, right click, choose a different point. So we'll set the height to this, and now I can paint this whole thing at that height. And then maybe I'll choose the height a little bit higher so that you don't have such a big drop off. Choose a lower height again, something like that. And so now we have this going down a little bit. Let's go back to smooth height, opacity all the way up, and let's smooth this out. I'm gonna try my best to not hit the cabin. And so I'm just trying to get the height terrain, and I want to avoid this the stepping look, so you'll have to be careful. But just it's a lot of back and forth between raise and smooth, setting doing the large bit of terrain of just getting the overall hilliness of it, it's a lot of back and forth like this as well. So let's go to set height. We'll bring the brush down a little bit, maybe let's go to raise and lower. Let's see, where do I want my lowest point? I want to do raise and lower, bring the opacity all the way down. Let's bring the brush. I think I want my lowest point to be right here, maybe, or maybe here. And I'm just holding shift. And actually, the set height might be hurting me in this case. So I'm just gonna use this big brush and try to paint the height to the best of my ability. I want it to go up higher on this side, so let's just use this big brush and try to bring it up over here. I brought the brush up. Let's just kind of sit around here to get an idea of what this looks like. Bring the brush down, maybe do it here as well. and it's getting all bumpy and it's getting all weird. So this is kind of like that same method I was talking about over here. And now we can go to smooth height, opacity all the way up, and let's just smooth this out as much as we can. I'm going to try not to hit the cabin at all because that could screw up kind of what we did over there. I end up using the set height tool a bunch, so I definitely highly recommend it. And this is all lumpy, which may or may not be what you want, but for the snow it might be fine. We're going to be adding a lot more hills with this anyways. I wish this was a bit more gradual, so I'm gonna just go back to raise and lower, bring my opacity all the way down, and maybe try to fix this a bit. And maybe we'll use that set height to that. Oh, I'm painting holes. I want set height. And maybe we'll go back to raise and lower. I'm gonna just try our best to paint over here. And now let's go back to smooth height, opacity all the way up. And let's just smooth this whole thing out. It is quite lumpy. Typically when I try to do like something that's a bit more gradual, I'll do, let's see if I can do it. I don't want to spend a million hours on sculpting, which we definitely could. But I would like set height, and this would be the height, and then I would set height just a little bit more, and then, you know, maybe here try to find the medium point, and then here do a little bit more, and then maybe here do a little bit more. So that kind of gradually will go up, and then we can go to smooth height, opacity is 100, and then we can smooth this whole thing out. And that way you can see how it's much, like it goes up and it's much flatter. Typically that's how I do it, but I think, you know, for this, look, you spend as much time as you want sculpting. We are going to stop here. Well, we're not going to stop here. We're going to go back to raise and lower, and now we're going to focus on building our hills. I want there to be like a big hill here. So in the other version, there was like this little path that kind of went this way into this hill. We're gonna kind of build that same thing, and then there was like a giant hill over here, so we'll do something much bigger right here, and I'm just gonna build hills all over this thing. We'll make this one really big, and then I'll remember as I'm doing this to get down low to kind of get a good idea of like what this is actually looking like. Like this. Maybe we'll put a big hill over here. Maybe we'll put some big hills back here. And also, I don't want the player to like see the edge of this map, or at least don't want it to be very clear to them where the edge is. We're gonna do our best while we're sculpting this. We're gonna do our best to hide where those drop-off points are. And I feel like this probably does a good job. Maybe the brush has a bit too big. We'll do some more hills right here. And let's go down here. Let's pretend as if I'm a player. This is looking pretty good. I think I want a big hill over here. When we smooth a lot of this stuff is gonna shrink. So maybe we'll exaggerate some of these features a bit more. Now let's go to smooth height, opacity all the way up, and smooth. Oh, also, you know, there's collision on the roof, and what I did in the other version is I wanted a fun way for the players to get up on, and I made like there was like this big snow mound here. Let's try to do something like that again. A way for these players to get up to the roof. Let's go to smooth height, opacity all the way up. You can see how extreme that smoothness is when you have something like that. That's why I was like, with the hills, it will get crushed probably. So I could maybe do something like that. Smooth height. We'll have to go inside and make sure that none of this terrain is like clipping with anything. And maybe that's enough for the players to jump. It might be. Maybe we'll go like a little tiny bit higher. Smooth height. That should work. And now, as I expected, it's clipping in here quite a bit. Let's try that paint holes method. Bring the brush down and just paint some of this out. How does that look on the other side? Perfect. Okay, going back to this, we're gonna go to smooth height, opacity all the way up, bring the brush up, and let's smooth all these hills that we just made. And there we go. This is a bit more extreme than the other version, but I think it's fine. Now with terrain, let's go ahead and add, what are we gonna add? We are gonna add our snow, our texture. So let's go back to this paint option, paint terrain. We're gonna go down to paint texture, and we need to create some terrain layers for our objects. So the way you paint textures onto your terrain is you create layers, and then you can kind of like, or you create layers and then you can choose the layer to paint with, if that makes sense. So let's do edit terrain layers. Well, actually, before I do that, let's make sure I go to the folder we created. We have snow in here. This should already be in your project, but I forgot to add a plain white texture because I don't really like this snow color texture. It's too obviously repeating, so I just like to use the normal map and this. So let's select terrain. We're going to go back to paint terrain, paint textures. We're going to do edit terrain layer, create layer, and then we are going to find this white. We're going to find the texture we want to use, and in this case it's this white, and that's going to be our snow. And if I select this layer, you can see the diffuse, which is like your albedo. That is this white texture, and then I want the normal map to be this. And then you can see that looks much more like snow, but it's a bit small and repeating. And I'm going to bring the brush size down so it's a bit easier to manage. We are going to increase this tiling settings to 5 maybe. And maybe we'll bring down the normal scale, the normal to like 0.5. That way it's not so harsh. I think I was a bit more extreme with the sculpting in this version than I was in the other version. It's a very lumpy world, but we'll work with it. It's fine. It's a cabin in the woods. It's fine. So I also want like paving stone, and I have that texture that I provided to you, this paving stone texture. We talked about it a little bit earlier. We're going to do edit terrain layers, add layer, and then we're going to find our paving stone. Paving stone. This is coming from the assets, but I don't want that. I want to create layer. My bad. Create layer is where we should have gone. I want to paint like a stone path here, and we have a paving stone texture that we had talked about earlier, and so we can use that to create a new layer. We're going to create edit terrain layers, create layer. We're going to go to paving stone, and we're going to choose our paving. There's 2 of them because these files are also included in the asset pack that I gave you. So just choose one of them. Wherever the texture you chose it should create a terrain layer object in that folder. So going back to textures, we are going to add the normal map, and we are going to make the smoothness 0. And it looks like it's giving us a warning because we need to tell Unity that this is a normal map. So let's apply that. If we select the terrain again, no more warning. There you go. No more warning. And just like you raised and lower, you can paint textures using your brush and opacity size. Just like that. And I like to make my opacity like 0.4, like really low. That way I can like, spray it on, I guess. So I'm just gonna do my best and paint textures here, and then we're gonna have it, we'll kind of do something similar to what I did in the other version. We'll just have it like wrap out this way. So paint that down, you know, to the best of your ability, however you like. And that should be kind of like out of view a little bit. And then if you don't like, by the way, to get that maximum, I just did shift space. So I hover over what I want and I press shift space. So that kind of maximizes my screen for me. And I could go back to, if I want to paint more snow, I can hit the snow layer and I can paint some more snow on here. And this works for no matter how many layers you have. So you can drag in a bunch of different stuff and have a million layers here and paint all the textures you want. But for this example, we are going to be using 2. One of the last things that we need are trees. Just like with textures and with, you know, raising, lowering terrain, you can also paint on trees. So we are going to, in the public version of this world that I created, I am using a tree asset pack that I purchased from the Unity asset store. If you want that specific tree pack, I will link that below. It is like $30, I think. But just for the sake of sharing the resources that I used, I will give you that pack. Obviously, I can't share that pack with you because it's not mine. But what I can share is my own trees, which I made. If you go to that package with all the prefabs, there are 2 trees in here. So we can drag trees onto the terrain like this, which we might do in some cases. Like I think I want a tree like right there specifically, and I don't think painting it on the terrain will let us do that. Maybe I want one. That's the one spot I think that we won't be able to paint on. But you could drag these on and put them in the prefab folder if you'd like, or you can paint them on. So let's select the terrain. Let's go to this paint trees section. We can press edit trees, add tree, and then you need to drag in a prefab here that works with this. And I think any prefab would work. But let's just grab our tree. We're going to drag this, and we're going to press add, and then we're going to press edit trees, add tree, and then we're going to drag in our other one and press add. And now we can paint a whole bunch of trees. So left click will paint, shift, left click will erase. And there's a bunch of options here. I like to kind of go one by one, if that makes sense. So like I'll bring my brush size down and the tree density up, and I'll be like, okay, I want a tree there. And then I'll be like, maybe I want the tree heights to be quite extreme and I want these to be big. So maybe I'll be like, oh, I want one there, and I want one there, and I want one there, and there, and there. And I'll just, you know, do this a whole bunch. And you can just paint this all over. And how this looks is all up to you. You can go as crazy with it as you want. Just know the more of this stuff that you add, the more the player is rendering. And this is specifically quite rough on Quest people because these are cut out. This is a cutout shader, and that's quite expensive for Quest people to render. Keep in mind on the amount of stuff that you are painting in these objects that, you know, the Quest people are gonna have to render this stuff. Now we can make a different version of this terrain for Quest people, and I don't really like how these LODs are working, so maybe I'll go ahead and I'll fix this. This isn't really planned as part of the tutorial, but I'm just changing the LODs a bit. But yeah, so what we'll do is paint this however you want, and then we'll create a version for Android, and we'll get to that when we get to that. So paint your trees. We'll go a little crazy here. We'll do that, and then let's get some variation. Ooh, that's very tall. I don't know if I want it that tall. Alright, so just go through, paint your trees until you have something that you like. Do I like this? You know, it's alright, I guess. We'll go with it. This is enough for me. You just, once you add your trees here, add trees, put the prefab of the tree in the thing, and then you can just select which one you want and paint it however you want. I manually drag this tree in, and I'm going to put that just in prefabs. Now we can focus on lighting. That is the next part of this tutorial, and lighting is a huge part of this world. And if you look, you can see that I've been editing this with the lights off. If I toggled lights on, let's see what happens. Whoa, way different. And that is because we are using the directional light, which is the only light in this project. We are going to go through lighting this world. We're going to do everything. But if you want a more, we're going to try to go fast. If you want a more in-depth version of lighting, I've got a much different tutorial. I have a tutorial specifically for lighting in the description. If that's what you need, I recommend, if you need to know lighting, to watch that tutorial. And you do need to know lighting. Lighting is very important, especially for VRChat worlds. If you have real-time lights, everything's really laggy. So let's start lighting this world, and we will talk about real-time and baking and non-real-time, etc. Okay, by default, VRChat starts you off with a directional light, which we have here. If you select this object and you go all the way into the inspector, you can see there's a whole bunch of settings for this. Directional light is kind of like the sun. And we can move that over there. And if you come over here, you can see the type of light for this object. We can bring in other lights. So if we right click and go all the way down to light, you can add in a point light, a spotlight, and an area light. An area light is like a big square or rectangle of light shining in one direction. A spotlight is exactly what you would think a spotlight is, and a point light is kind of like a light bulb. It shines in all directions. If we select directional light, we can change our type from spot, directional, point, and area in the inspector if we wanted to. There's some other settings in here like color. This is the color of the light. I think this is the default light color. We might do like blue, so you can change that if you want. So this is our sun. Mode is real time. This is by default. I highly recommend you do not use real time unless you absolutely have to. So we're going to change this to baked. That means that the light will be rendered for the players. By changing this to baked does not mean your lights are baked. What this means is that this light is now labeled as baked, and when you do bake lights, it will take this light into effect. So we have to actually bake lights. All this does is label the light as baked. You actually have to manually bake your lights. Intensity will control the intensity of your light. Indirect multiplier. This is kind of like your bounce lighting. This will affect how bright the light is bouncing off of other objects. So we're going to keep that as 1. Shadow type, so I recommend using soft shadow. Cookie, this is if you wanted the lights to have a specific shape, you can put like a texture here. And I think that's enough. Or size is like, this doesn't really affect directional light, but point lights will have different things. So most of the light settings are the same. For the sun, this is supposed to be set at night. So I don't want the intensity. This is to be 1. Maybe we'll do like 0.2, maybe 0.1. Because this is just supposed to be a nighttime scene. And I don't have a moon in the sky, but that's fine. Let's talk about another type of light. Let's go down to light, point light. Oh, spotlight. I added a spotlight by accident. Let's try to use W and use these arrow keys to bring this into the project. Oh, and it looks like we have some issues with the terrain. We've got some stuff poking up here. We need to fix that. So let's quickly now, let's fix them. I'm going to paint holes. Okay, back to spotlights. Spotlights, exactly what you would think it would be. In the inspector, you've got a lot of the same settings, except the only difference is you have a range now, which will determine how far this spotlight goes. And then on top of that, you have the intensity, indirect multiplier, the angle of the spotlight. For this, I don't think I have any lights that would actually require a spotlight, so we're just gonna delete that. Right click, light, point light. Point light is a light. Oops, looks like my thing is bugging out. So sometimes sometimes Unity experiences bugs, like my thing not changing. So I will fix that and be right back. Okay, fixed the bug. So point light is like a light bulb. It shines in all directions. We're going to be using that mainly in this world. So let's go ahead and set this up quite a bit. Point light. So it's basically the same as spotlight, except for it doesn't have the angle of the spotlight. Range, we're going to kind of keep this simple. Let's do baked. Mode is baked, not real time. And I want all these lights inside to be kind of warm. So we're going to move this kind of to the orange color and maybe do something around there. And now we're going to want to place this around the world. So I'm keeping this in the light game object so that it's organized in the hierarchy. So now let's just take these point lights and place them all over the world. And I think this icon's a bit big. So in the gizmo option, I can kind of make these icons a bit smaller, a bit more manager to work with. And now I'm going to be just duplicating these and placing them all around the world. For these lamps, I'm going to do my best to get it inside the lamp. It might be a bit difficult, but right click WASD to fly around the world will help you a lot with that. So Control D to duplicate in Unity, and we're going to bring this one over here. And so the lamps, I'm trying to actually get them within the lampshade, and for this sconce, I'm just going to put it like above, and we're going to keep the range on all of these the same for now. After we do our first bake, we can adjust the stuff that we do. Control D to duplicate. Let's drag this, bring this over in here, drop this down, and you can light your scene however you want. It's kind of up to you. I am doing it differently than how I did my first one. Like the live version is a much more moodier and darker scene. And this will certainly still be moody and dark, but I think I'm going to brighten it up quite a bit in many places. So Control D, duplicate. For these standing lights, I'm just kind of putting it right outside. Control D, duplicate. Let's drag this one over here. And then for the lamp, let's try our best to get it in the lamp, kind of like that. We also have these candles over here. We can do Control D. We can put a light over here, but we definitely don't need the range to be 7. We can make the range maybe like even like 0.5, and then increase the intensity to like 2 or something. And these are also going to be warm tones, so we'll just use the same color. And then we can just Control D. Put these all on top of each one of these lights. Control D, something like that. And then there's some more over here, so we can do Control D, bringing this down, put this over, Control D. So when you're lighting, you're trying to, this is not representative really of what your scene is going to look like, but it's the best you got, is to see how it looks in real time, which is you can kind of gauge what it's going to look like when you bake it. Things might not look good to you to begin with. Sometimes things might be flashing. What can help you with that is if you go to Edit, Project Settings, and go down to Quality, and you can increase the pixel light count. This will just increase the amount of objects each of your lights are able to interact with, and you're seeing this, it will have no effect on your baked lighting. It's just kind of like a visual thing in Unity. And I'm noticing my point lights are set to no shadow. I want them to be yes shadow, so soft shadow. That'll make things much nicer. And there's some other settings that we're not really seeing yet. If we go to window, we will eventually need the lighting window, and I guess now is as good as any time to open the lighting window. So let's go to the top, let's go to window, let's go to rendering, lighting, and in here there's going to be a bunch of options. So I'm actually going to navigate to my scenes folder. So in that folder we created scenes, and I like to save the light setting asset there, so I'll just open that and press new. And so we've created a new lighting setting. I'm just going to keep the default lighting name, and there's a whole bunch of options in here. This stuff is all information for bake lighting. We are going to be using progressive GPU because I want to bake with my GPU. A lot of this stuff I ignore and you don't really need to know much about it. Max bounces too, if you want to increase that you can. Light map resolution, this is the resolution of your light map. I like to do 20. Max light map settings, I always do 4K. And you kind of just need to gauge like what your system capabilities are. Me baking at 4K at 20 light map resolution is more than fine. Increasing this to 40 will increase how long it takes to bake. Things like that. Light map parameters, default medium. These are typically the settings I use using the progressive GPU light map settings. If you go into environment, there's some more stuff that we can manipulate, like the real-time shadow color, which won't affect unless you have real-time lights. Environment lighting, I like to do gradient and choose my environment lighting. So this is going to be like how dark can your shadows get, how bright are some of your like other objects. Typically I like to go pretty dark, and maybe we'll go blue. And before you bake you can see this actually change in your scene, but after you bake you won't see that. And then we can go to environment reflections. By default, it will use your Skybox as your like backup reflections, but we'll get to reflection probes in a second. At the very bottom, there's fog. Now, I don't typically use fog in most of my worlds, but for this world, I definitely want to turn it on because we're going to be having snow. When you add fog, just kind of like washes out the objects depending on how far it is. You can change how close the fog is by using this value. So 0.1 is like everything. 0.01 is default. Maybe we'll do like 0.02. And to make this fog really look as good as it can, you want it to match your skybox. So we're going to take this little eyedropper and we're going to choose the skybox color. And that's going to make it seem like it's fading into the skybox. Let's do 0.015. I think that will look much better. And I think it does look much better. And that's kind of the important stuff, scene and environment in the lighting settings. So remember, you go to window, rendering, lighting, duplicating these probes. We're going to do the fireplace, so Control D to duplicate this. And we are going to go to the inspector. Maybe we'll do something like 10. And this is supposed to be fire, so we're going to make it orange. Maybe we'll do 8 and 1. 1? We'll try with that first. We'll see how it goes. And then the Christmas tree, which is a bit kind of like a different object than what all this other stuff is. Let's grab this point light. Let's press Control D, duplicate. We're going to do red light to begin with. And maybe we'll do intensity, we'll do 1. And then instead of the range 0.5, we'll do 1. And we're just going to duplicate this around a couple times. Maybe over here we'll do green. Control D, duplicate. And I'm just, I don't need a point light on every light that I have on this tree, but enough to kind of sell the effect. Maybe this next one will do blue. Like, does it look like a Christmas tree yet? I don't know. Maybe we'll put red somewhere else again. And maybe we'll take this green and put it over here. And this red, we'll Control D and we'll put it over here. And then we can hope that this will kind of look like a Christmas tree once we bake. Moving on, we can grab this point light, Control D, put it in this object. And I'm going to Control D these same light settings, and I'm going to put them everywhere else in this world. So I'm going to speed through that. And cutting in here, and now that I have the terrain down, we could actually put some prefabs out here. I have this lamppost prefab that I've included. I'm going to put that out here and maybe duplicate that a couple times around. And instead of having this set to center, let's put it back to pivot so my cursor or my arrow keys are in the pivot spot. And then we'll do that. And that way I can put some lights out here. So now I'm going to duplicate some of these point lights and put them out there as well. Okay, we've put point lights all over this world and we are getting ready to bake. There are still some more things that we need to do to bake, but there's some stuff that I want to talk about first, especially for people who have never baked before. First off, we need to add reflection probes so our objects have reflections, and we need light probes. Light probes are the things that will light objects up that are not static. So basically, when you bake lights, only the objects that are static get baked. All of these prefabs that we bring in are all ready to get baked already. The stuff that we brought in is not ready to get baked. So like if we look at the sectional sofa, if you come all the way into the inspector, you can see that it is static, and you can see like I've prepared these meshes. They're ready to bake. The objects we brought in are not ready to bake. Now, if we go to Blender, if you remember from the last tutorial that we created a second UV map for light map UVs, and I said I'll explain it when we get there, but we're there. Light map UVs are, when you bake lights, it's like you're putting another texture on all your objects, and this texture needs a UV map just like the other textures do. That's what this is. So these meshes are now prepared to receive light map UVs or for baking, but we need to tell the program that this is a static mesh, which we have not. So if we select this cabin base that we've created and come over into the inspector, you can see that it is not set to static. You can see that all these objects are not static. We need these objects to be static. So let's select the top one, the parent object, press static. Do you want to enable the static flags for all the child objects as well? Yes, change children. So now all these objects should be static. And because they have light map UVs that we've created, they should be ready to be baked. When you make an object static, this collider does not need to be static, by the way. We don't want to bake onto it. Player doesn't see it. But when you make an object static, you'll get this new option under the mesh renderer called light mapping. The higher this number is, the bigger this object will be on your light map textures or your light maps. The higher this number is on all your objects, the longer your bake will take. So just be warned, we're going to keep everything at 1 to begin with. Because there are a lot of trees, maybe we should double check those tree objects. So we're going to go FBX, or we're going to go to prefab. We're going to find those trees. Let's press open prefab. If I select each one of these, we can see that the light scale and light map is 0.2 on the LODs and 0.05 and 0.01. Those are pretty good numbers for baking. I just wanted to be careful because there's a lot of these objects, and these trees are gonna take up a lot of space on our light map UVs. So we want to make sure they don't take up that much space. So we decrease the scale in light maps for those objects. If we wanted to affect any of these other objects, we could increase them, but for now we're just going to keep everything at 1. So remember, only things that are set to static, or really if you come and you hit this drop down, the only things that are set to contribute GI, all static objects are contribute GI, but the real thing is you need this checked for it to get baked. So make sure all your objects are static. We are ready to do our first bake, and I'm not saying the first bake is going to be a success, but it might be. We also have a missing shader here that we're not going to deal with until later. This might make a purple glow on this object, so I guess we'll be mentally prepared for that. Let's create let's go ahead and put the reflection probe and the light probe groups in. So reflection probe, this is going to be the reflections on all the objects. It comes in looking like this. There should be a big ball in the center of this square. I'm gonna just double click that to recenter. So you can think of this ball as like the circle or the sphere. This is where your 360 camera is going to be sitting, and then it's going to take a picture from this point, and then anything in this big cube is going to get affected by this picture. This picture is going to be the image that reflects off all your objects. So let's resize this. Let's make this the size of this room, and you can add as many of these as you want, though the more you add, the more time it's going to take for you to scale these boxes. We'll put one in here, We'll go all the way up to the roof. Bring this in. Actually, it doesn't need to go that high. And then we'll grab this one, Control D. Let's bring this one, and this will be the upstairs one. I think that's good. And then we can have one for outside as well. Maybe it intersects with the roof just a little bit. And I'm gonna hit this button and bring this all the way up here. I think that's fine. And then we'll grab this, Control D, and this will be the one out here. So let's resize this, and perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you know, I actually don't like the one I did out here. I'm gonna delete that. And I'm just gonna take this one. I'm gonna duplicate that and put it over here. And then we'll, I don't know, resize it to something like that. That's a bit overkill. There you go, we'll do that. This one's gonna have a special use, so we'll get to that in a second. Now let's add our light probe. So this is gonna light any objects that are non-static. So these are gonna be your moving objects, your pickup objects, the players walking around. This is what's gonna light them up. We're gonna go light probe group. It's gonna bring in something that looks like this. Let's bring this inside the house. Bring this up. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to, so basically, see where each one of these dots are. Let's press Edit Light Probe Group. These dots are going to be, like, it's going to save the lighting information at this point. And when the player is close to this dot, it's going to use the information it saved right here and project that onto the player. You're going to want to put these all over your world. And having some by lights is usually a pretty good idea. We're gonna do this very quickly though, and I'm just gonna Control D, duplicate. Let's press Select All. Ooh, actually, Select All, Control D, and we're just gonna put these all over the place. Now you want to be careful, because if I were to put these probes and they're intersecting with this wall, this probe is gonna be pitch black. So when your player walks by this probe and is closest to this probe, they're gonna be pitch black. So just be careful. Duplicate these, put them all over your world. We're going to speed through this, and I'm going to put them all over the place. And you should too. Okay, I've placed all my probes. We've got lights in, we've got reflection probes, we've added fog, we've looked at scaling, we've talked about light map UVs. It's time. It is time. Let's go to the lighting window. Let's go all the way down into bake lights. All you have to do is press this generate lighting button. So click that. And this may take a second depending on your PC specs. Hopefully it won't take too long. So we'll click this, we'll see the results. It might be really bad, it might be really good. Okay, lights have been baked. Let's see the results. All of our lights were set to, if we go to the inspector, we're set to bake. I just want to like double check and make sure I didn't screw this up. I think it's good. We can just kind of fly around, kind of see what it did. You can see the reflection from this is taking that light extremely strongly. Yeah, so this object is using the reflection probe from up here as well, so we're seeing some purple bleed in just from the reflection probe hitting it. So that needs to get fixed, but that will get fixed. Other than that, like, this kind of turned out pretty good. It's kind of dark over here, not really a big fan of that. If we come up here, like, it's not bad. It feels pretty good. It feels really similar to the other thing. You can see that purple, that's not light, that's the reflection probe taking that. Everything else seems pretty good. The only thing, I feel like I want it darker out here, but that may not be necessary. It's a bit dark in here. Maybe to fix that, we can increase this to like 8 instead of 7, I think it was. We could increase these lights a little bit, which might be good if I can select all of them without screwing this up. I'm just holding shift and left clicking and trying to select all these. Maybe we'll do like 1.5. We'll see what happens with that. We can also increase this to 10, maybe 1.2. intensity, I think if we go to lighting environment, we can make these shadows a bit darker. And now that we've baked lighting, we don't see it changing in real time. And I also want to change the directional light. I think the directional light is a bit too bright, so we'll bring this down. Just bring the color down a little bit, and everything's baked, so now that when we're changing lights and doing stuff, you don't see anything change, but that's okay. We've made our adjustments. So we have this reflection probe out here. I said this is going to be a special case, and that is because I want everything. We need a backup reflection probe. By default, if you go to the lighting setting, go to environment, by default, the environment reflections is the skybox. Basically what that means is if your object is not in one of these reflection probe cubes, it's going to use the skybox. I want it to use this instead of the skybox. So I'm going to go to custom, and then we're going to type in reflection probe here, and we're going to find this object, which is this one right here, and then I'm going to select it. And now if you're not in any reflection probe cube, it's going to know it's going to need to use this. So we've made some lighting changes. Let's go ahead and go to scene in the lighting tab and press generate again. Okay, we finished baking again, and I think it's good. Let's look inside the living room, see how that did. It looks like it's definitely a bit brighter. We could go further with this, but for the sake of time in this tutorial, we're gonna call it here. We're gonna say that this is good. Just in case you do have any objects in here that don't have pre-made UV light map UVs, what you can do is you can find the FBX object for that object, go into the inspector, and you can generate them in Unity. And by hitting this button, press generate and then apply. I don't recommend it because Unity generated light map UVs are typically very shit for any object more complicated than a cube. So just keep that in mind. Something important to note about progressive light mapper in Unity, sometimes it has trouble with back faces and it doesn't really know what to do. I don't see it happening in here. It seems like everything is baked pretty well, actually, which is surprising. If you do have a case where light just looks really, really bad on an object and you don't know why, select that object, go into the inspector, go into the material, and make sure in the Unity standard shader, make sure you have double-sided global illumination checked on. This issue is not happening for us, so we don't really have to worry about it, but if you had like a wall, usually it's like walls or floors this happens to, because usually you just use a plane like this. Double-sided global illumination will fix those issues for you. I'll throw up a picture of it, of something that looks kind of bad, and it looks like we've got clipping here. We don't want that clipping through. For now, we are going to call lighting complete, and we are going to move on to post-processing. So let's organize our hierarchy a little bit. We've got some objects in here. We are going to create some post-processing. So in your VRC world, this is your game object, which is your spawn, which we are going to move now to, I don't know, let's move it out here, and we'll make sure this player's facing the log cabin when they spawn in. We could test this by pressing this play button. And in the inspector here, I mentioned this had all your VRChat stuff. Your pipeline manager is like the serial code, which I mentioned. This is going to be like your spawn information and world information. There's something in here called a reference camera. This can take attributes from your main camera and use them in game, which is going to be important in a moment. And then it also has like information on jump impulse speed, which controls like how fast this player is moving, how high this player jumps, how fast they run. That's this information here, and you can affect that by changing these values. Some scaling information, so the maximum height is 5. So you can adjust all this if you want it for your world. What's important, we're going to focus for post-processing, is this reference camera. We want to take some information from this camera. So we're going to take this main camera, drag it over, and this is going to be referencing our main camera. So let's click our main camera. And one thing that's important to change is the clipping plane. So let's, instead of 0.3, let's just make this the smallest value of 0.01. And now you need to import post-processing. You can do that by going to Windows, Package Manager, and finding Unity registry, I think their post-processing should be in here if it's not included by default. To add post-processing to your world, you will click your main camera, and we are going to type in post-processing. We're going to find the post-processing component, and we're going to add a post-processing layer. Add that to your world, or add that to the camera, and we're going to change the layer to something like water. And then these layers, every object is on a layer, and depending on the layer, will change how the objects interact with each other. We don't need to get too deep into that. Just know that the water layer is a good layer for post-processing. That's all you need to do for that. And then let's create a new game object. Right-click in the hierarchy, create empty. We're going to call this post-processing. And then we're going to go to add component, and we're going to add a post-processing volume. And because on here we said the volume blending would be on the layer water, we need to click this post-processing scene, come all the way over here, and change the layer from default to water. And now this is gonna be a global post-processing volume. So we're gonna press global, we're gonna press new, and that's gonna create a new post-processing profile. And now we can add effects to it. Let's add bloom, and let's add color grading. So for the bloom, let's just check everything. And we'll go inside the house to see how this is affected. Maybe we'll go to like 1. If we increase this a whole bunch, you can see the values changing in your world. 0.5 is usually more than enough, in my opinion. Maybe we'll do 1, because a lot of these emissives aren't that strong. And then for color grading, let's turn on a whole bunch. And you can do whatever you want here. I always just do simple stuff. Neutral is usually my favorite. You'll see worlds with people using this, which those people are crazy in my opinion, because I hate this. I'm gonna do custom, and now I can like click all these buttons and change all of these values. Make this do whatever I want it to do. So just go through here, change the values you want, and make it look as nice, or just make it look however you want. Just go crazy. So I just adjusted the levels a little bit, and I'm gonna go with this. And I'm looking at this terrain, and it's a bit silly that there's brick intersecting with this step. So I'm gonna change this into snow real quick. That's fine. Okay. So that's post-processing. Big thing is just making sure that the layer of the post-processing object actually matches the layer that you set in the main camera. And then for it to work in-game, your VRCWorld game object, this scene descriptor, needs to be referencing the main camera, which has the post-processing layer on it. We just finished post-processing, and I'm looking at this, and I want to change some more stuff up. It looks, I think I need more trees in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and add some more stuff, and then rebake, and then we'll come back and we'll see how it looks with everything after I'm done. Okay, that finished baking. I added more trees. It definitely looks better. We're getting some weird reflections from this missing shader up here, so we should probably go ahead and fix that. But before, we're probably getting that because it's using the wrong. Let's make sure it uses a different one. There we go. That looks better. I'm gonna go to that skybox texture, and I'm gonna affect it. I think this is just a bit too bright for what I want. So let's go and find that skybox. It should be in the project folders. So skybox, find that. We're gonna go to the inspector, and then we are gonna bring this down, and that should darken the skybox. And then we can go back to lighting, go into environment, go to other settings, and we're gonna change the color of the fog by matching the skybox. All of that feels better. And then after this point, after you've made your adjustments, you can go and you can play with post-processing again if you want. But next we're gonna import the Protv asset. So this is an asset that's created by another VRChat creator. Their name is Architect. You see Protv in a lot of worlds. I will link below where you can download that asset from. I've got it here. You want to install it by going through VCC, or that's the VRChat Creator Companion. So just come here. I'll link this page in the description if you need it. Just go and press add to VCC. This is, I think, just the video player, and then there's like some extra stuff. I think this lets you actually use it in Unity. I think you might need this. Regardless, you should download all of this and then go to VCC, and once it's installed, you should see these options for the architect asset down here. And the way you install it is you just click this and install the latest version, which would be the top of the drop down. Do that for all of the architect assets that you have. And then once you're done doing that, you can, I think it installed everything. Once you're done doing that, just open up your project again, and it should load everything into your Unity. So just wait for that to finish loading. All right, once that's done loading, you should be able to go to packages in your Unity, and you should see all the architect folders down here. If you don't see like this many, it probably means you didn't import the samples and the examples and stuff that they include. So when you go to your VRChat Creator Companion, make sure you can go to settings, go to packages. You probably just need to check show pre-release packages on. Then you can go to your project, go to manage project, and then you should see the other architect packages there. But once you have that, we are going to go. So in the scene, it actually found the material I was using for this TV and this prefab. So if you are using the asset pack that I provided, this probably also happened to you. We're still getting that purple shine everywhere. Is because we need to rebake. But we could actually probably just rebake this reflection probe. If I select that and go to inspector and press bake, it will probably update, and it does. So now you don't get that full purple. You're still getting purple because there's purple on this emissive texture here. So we didn't get rid of it completely. But let's get this video player in. This video player package, I think it's important to import it now. There's a lot of useful tools that you can use and for other things in this world. For example, like your UIs, there's some stuff in here. It also comes with another asset called Text Mesh Pro. So I'll show you what I mean in a second. But let's go to packages. Let's go to architect.protv. It should be the first folder. Double click that. If you go to samples, go to prefabs. I like to bring in, if we go to TVs, I like to bring in this one. And you've probably seen this asset in other worlds. Once you drag this into your scene, you should get this TMP importer pop up. This is the Text Mesh Pro asset, prompting you to install the asset into your scene. This is really useful for creating UIs, and this will come in handy when we're making our UIs for the world and for toggling on and off in the mirrors. So go ahead and import this asset. Once the asset is installed, you should be able to see the text on this video player. What I did for this TV is I took the material, which is the Protv home theater. If you can't find this, you can just go into packages and search for it. I took this material and dragged it onto this TV. So we don't need this TV screen, but we are going to steal some stuff from this prefab. So if we come into the hierarchy, we can see everything that's in this prefab. So we've got the home theater, and then in the inspector, there's a bunch of settings for it. We're going to go down to room, and for all the models that come with this, I don't want any of it. So I'm just going to uncheck those. What I do want is the media controls, which is the controls for the video player, and then the speakers. So the speakers are the media controls links to the speakers, so whatever video you're playing, the audio is going to come out of these speakers. So I'm just going to place this in place of the TV. So I kind of want the sound to come from this direction. We can play with the speaker settings by hitting this drop down, selecting all of these, and maybe we can, each one kind of has their own settings, but if I want to increase the distance, by default it comes in at 6.5. We're going to increase this to let's do 25, so it's really big. You can hear it everywhere. If you're in the house, you should be able to hear the video player. And then let's move the media controls in place. And this is about the extent of what we're going to go over the video player. If you want to play with their other stuff, obviously you can go crazy and do whatever you want. But this is all we're going to do for this player. If you have the Architect Protv extras folder, there's some more prefabs in there. So this has like different types of stuff, but it's the same video player. The next thing we're going to do is create particles. We need two types of particle, or we need two different particles in here. We need one for the fireplace and the snow. So in the hierarchy, I'm going to right click. I'm going to press create empty. So this is just an empty game object I'm going to create to help with organizing in the hierarchy. I'm going to call this particles, And first, I think we will work on the snow. So let's just right click on this empty game object that we just made. Right click, go down to Effects, Particle System. And you're going to get something like this. We're going to bring this up because this is going to be our snow. And I'm just going to go through creating this particle. Particles, I mean, you could do a lot with particles. And I recommend if you're trying to learn how to play with particles to like YouTube search whatever type of particle you want to make. There's going to be better tutorials than what I'm about to show you on there. We're just going to go through, and hopefully going through you're going to learn a little bit about creating particles in here. So first thing I want to change is the shape. We're going to make this a box, and maybe we'll do scale 100. The Y can be 1, and then we can do 100 on the Z. And we'll get something like this. Let's drag this up. Going to the top here, we're going to look at these. We're going to turn on pre-warm. Pre-warm will, like, instead of having all the particles start from the beginning of the emission for these particles, it will start somewhere in the middle. That way, when you spawn in, the snow will already be falling. So let's check that on. Start lifetime is going to be, we're going to need something long, so maybe 16. We might need to play with this. For start size, this is the size of the particle. We're going to do random between two constants, and we're going to do something like 0.02 and 0.1, and that should make everything very small. Start color can be white because it's snow. Gravity modifier is 0. We're not going to use gravity to make our snow effect. Simulation space, local. Simulation speed, 1. We're going to increase the max particles to like 2,000 maybe. It's kind of hard to tell if this is going to be good because we haven't really, they're not falling yet, but that's okay. Let's hit emission. So this is the amount of particles that spawn into existence. So the rate over time is the amount that like spawn into existence, and the max is the max amount. So if we do this to like 2,000, it will spawn 2,000 at one time, and then it will not spawn anymore until they've all disappeared because our max particle is 2,000. But lucky for us, we don't want 2,000. We can do something like 200, something like that. Let's scroll down to velocity over lifetime. This is what's going to let our snow fall. We're going to check this on, and then we're going to do something like -1, -2. You can see it's starting to actually fall now. 1, and I'm just playing with these. Let's change this to be random between two constants, and we're going to do like -2, maybe like that. So how does that look? You can see there's like this gap between these particles and the particles down here. That is because the particles are emitting. It's hitting its max particle limit of 2,000, so it's stopping the simulation, or whatever you call it. And then once these all disappear, it's respawning again. To fix that, we would increase the max particles, but we're going to adjust this so that the particles disappear way sooner because we don't need this much snow out in this random space over here. So we're going to ignore that for now. We're going to, I think I kind of like how this is going so far, so we're going to leave that. Let's scroll down to size over lifetime. We're going to check that on. And then we're also want color over lifetime. For color over lifetime, we're going to make it, we're going to turn the alpha, so we're going to make it completely transparent at the start and then completely transparent at the end. So we're going to make it completely transparent at the start, and if we just kind of click up here, we can, let me pause this because it's lagging a little bit. If we just click at the top here, we can add different colors and change the alpha value. Down here is where you can change the color value. I don't need all these, so I'm just going to delete them. I need one there, there, and then the ones at the end, we're going to make them completely transparent. That way when it comes in transparent and then kind of fades in, and then it'll fade out. Size over the lifetime, we're going to hit this little graph, and we're going to adjust this a little bit. We're going to do something like this, maybe. That should be good. Next, we're going to affect the noise. Let's restart this so we can kind of see what's happening with the particles. The particles are so small, so it's kind of hard to see this effect, but for stuff like this, I usually put it on. We're going to turn on noise, and this is going to let particles kind of move around and follow this noise pattern. So we're going to change the strength to 0.5 because I don't want it to be too strong. And then last, I think we're going to turn on collision. We're going to change this to world. I'm going to change the max kill speed to 0. Bounce can be 0. Dampen will do 1. And now when the particles hit the terrain, they should disappear. And because now more of the particles are disappearing, we're not getting that like empty space effect between, like, remember there was that space in between. Now we're not getting that. And I think for snow, this is okay. So we're going to move on and work on the fire now. All right, let's move to where we're going to want to make the fire. I'm going to rename this particle snow so that we know that that's snow. Now, if you go to that assets folder that I gave you, there's a particles folder, and in there is some textures for particles. We're going to create just the fire particle. And when I made this for the world, I followed a tutorial on YouTube on how to make fire particles, and they go through like creating this texture. And so I followed that tutorial to make this, and I'll link that below if you want. Just for the sake of this tutorial, we're going to go through this really quickly. So just like before, we're going to right click on that particles empty game object that we created. We're going to go down to effects, particle system, and you'll get this thing again. Let's drag this into the house. Let's take this down. We're going to put this where we want the particle. You'll have this big cone. This is the shape, and we do want the cone. I'm going to press E, and then I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. So I'm just rotating it on that red circle, holding control. We're going to bring this down. So now the particles are shooting up. And let's drag this into here, drag this down. We're going to affect the shape just a little bit. We're going to start with the radius and do something like 0.01 or maybe 0.02. Make it a little bit bigger, and then we'll do the angle like 2. It's kind of hard to tell if this is going to be good while we're, haven't really affected a lot of the stuff. So one of the textures that, so that tutorial kind of walks you through how to make a texture that looks like this. You're going to right click, create a material, and this is already done in that folder for you, but you can right click, create a material part. We'll do fire, and then you can take this texture, put it on, take this texture, put it, why is that not working? This text fire is the texture. You just take this, put it on there, and then you can hit this drop down. I like to use, you can use VRChat mobile, and then there should be one in here, particles, additive. That should work. And then you can take this, drag it onto your particle system. Let's rename this. We can rename it fire. You should get something that looks like this, which looks really bad. So this is a texture sheet. This is a texture sheet that has, it basically has 4 images, which are like stills for an animation. And we can tell the particle that this is a 4-frame animation by going all the way down, hitting texture sheet animation. And we can say this is a grid, and this is a 2x2 grid if you look at the texture. So we'll do 2x2. And now it will cycle through these 4 images on this texture in the particle. Another thing you can do is adjust how fast it goes through these frames. So if we go to frame over time, we hit this drop down. We're going to do constant. Let's actually do random between 2 constant, and we will do 0 and maybe 4. So we'll just leave it like that. Let's scroll all the way up. We'll start from the top, and we'll start making some changes here. Start lifetime, we can do something like 0.75. Start speed, let's slow it down, so 0.6. Let's adjust the size. We'll do random between 2 constants, 0.3 and 0.5. That's looking a little bit better. We're going to change the start color to, let's just do like an orange. And you can do like random between 2 colors or 2 gradients and stuff like that if you want. But we're just going to do a simple color. Gravity modifier, we're going to do something really small, like just to add a little bit to it. Max particles, we don't need this so high, so we're just going to do like 100, and then we'll keep the emission to 10. So it spits out 10, and we'll only at most have 100. Next, let's let's go all the way down to color over lifetime, and we're going to change this to be, we're going to make it transparent at the beginning and at the end, like we did with the snow. So it fades in and fades out. But now we also want to adjust the color. So let's start with like yellow, and then we'll add another color and then do like an orangish red. And then maybe we'll add another one and do a deeper red. We'll get rid of this one because we don't need it fading to white. And then we'll drag this down, maybe the alpha down to something like that. And I think that's good. We'll just go with that. And now let's do the size over lifetime. So let's check this one on, hit this drop down, select the graph. We can do something like, we'll select that, do something like this. I like when the fire kind of like scales down as it gets to the top, and it's kind of hard to tell with how bright this is. Maybe red. Let's make it orange for most of it. I think this is fine. I think as fire goes, I think that should be fine. I think this orange might be a bit too strong. It's kind of fading out that, so maybe we can bring the intensity down a little bit to like 0.8. All that stuff is like messing with like nitpicking it, which you should nitpick because it makes the worlds look better, but for this tutorial I think this is fine. So that's just a really simple fire. If we drag this out, we kind of get a better view of it. Looks like that. You can do more to this, like add another particle effect to add glow. You could add like little sparks coming out. You can do a whole bunch of stuff. The tutorial I linked where I learned how to do this particle will go over even more than that, so I recommend that you watch that. So I recommend you watch that if you're interested in doing more with particles. Now we're going to bring in another asset from another creator in. We're going to do string lights around the log cabin. So this is an asset I use from another creator. Their name is Redsim, and on their Patreon, and this is a free asset. They have something called Flexicurve. So this lets you add string lights to your worlds. It's a really good asset. I use it in the Black Hat. I use it in a lot of places. This is also the same creator that creates a really good skybox that I use in basically every world. So, but that one I think is paid. This one's free, so if you want this, the link for it is below. We're going to use it in this world. So just download the latest Unity package. And then once you have it, select the Unity package and drag it into your world. You should see this. It's just like importing anything else we've imported. We're going to press import. And once that's done loading, you can go to your assets folder and go to Redsim, and you should see this Flexicurve folder in here. By going to presets, default, there's some options in here. We're going to hit fairy light. We're going to do rainbows, but I don't think there's a prefab in here, but it's fine. We don't need it. We can go to the hierarchy, right click, create an empty, and we're going to call this Flexicurve. In the inspector, we can add a component. So this is just an empty game object. The only like quote unquote script that's on here is like telling the game like where this thing is actually positioned in the world. We're going to add another one. We're going to add the Flexicurve component, which is the script that we got from importing this package. We've added the Flexicurve in here. Now we've got something that looks like this. In the presets default fairy light, we can actually bring in some of these presets. So I think we should just be able to drag these little things, bring them in. You can see it changes how this looks. Maybe just for example, you can kind of test out some of the other stuff. The first one is the one that we want because this is like the rainbow color. And all this does is it changes the settings and the material so that it makes this specific like string of lights. So on this object, you should see like these three little dots. If you don't see these three little dots, it probably means that your gizmos are off, so just turn them on. So if I toggle that off, you can't see it, toggle it on. I'm actually going to turn gizmos off so I can move this somewhere. That just makes it easier moving this around your scene. And if you see all these yellow lines are from your light probes. This is also really annoying, and we can turn that off by hitting the gizmos drop down, scrolling all the way down and finding these little dots, and we can turn off all the light probe stuff. Basically what the yellow lines were showing is like, it was just saying there's light probes here, and we're blending these light probes to show what the light looks like on this non-static object. So if your gizmos are on, you should see these three little dots. Hitting this middle one will control like how much slack there is. The other dots will let you move these items around. And then holding control with gizmos off, you should see this little yellow button or this little yellow circle, if you click, it will add another row of string lights, and then you can move this around. So let's turn gizmos off so we can place this. The string lights will be added to this end like we saw. So let's just place this somewhere, and I'm going to turn off the lights just so I can see a little bit better. We're going to rotate this. We're going to try to make some string lights on this roof, and I think that's good placement for now. Let's turn gizmos on. We can now take this, move this around. Let's take this one. We're going to drag it all the way to the end, all the way right here. And before we add more to this, we could affect some of these settings in here. So let's see what we've got. Going up to the Flexicurve script, we can adjust the spacing. We can adjust the scale. So maybe we'll increase that, increase the spacing a little bit. We can change the rotation of where these lights are, like what direction they're pointing. We just maybe do a little bit. You can turn off the random and making it random. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. So just kind of go through this and change. You can see it kind of looks like these lights are not directly on the object, and that's because our decimation is pretty low. So it's pretty high. So if we just kind of decrease that, we can get it a bit closer to our lights, and I think that's fine. Let's turn lights on. If we click off, we can kind of see how it looks. And you can see it's shining. That shine is from our post-processing, our bloom settings. So if that's too strong for you, you can go in and adjust your bloom settings in post-processing. But I think this is good. Let's turn lights off. We're going to select this Flexicurve object again. And now we are going to finish off the light. So we're going to hold control. And so this yellow circle, the icon here, should lock. Once you hit control, it should lock onto wherever the collider is. So I think I do have a collider here, so that's kind of where that circle is. If I left click, it added a whole new string, and that's what we want. We're going to do that again. Control, click. Oh, it went all the way to the terrain, which is fine. We can move it manually. Just drag it down, bring it over, and just do your best to place it where you want it. And it looks like one more. Control, click, move it into position. Let's turn the lights back on, and now we can look. I think there's too much slack here, so let's select that, grab this, drag it up. Same thing here. And now we've got Christmas lights. You can add as many of these Flexicurve objects as you want. You could duplicate this and move it somewhere else, or you can start again from scratch like we did. This is all we're going to do for this tutorial, but you can add it to the whole house if you want. You can add it to here, to there. You could put it anywhere. You could add string lights under here that's using a different setting. It's a good asset. I highly recommend it. Okay, this world is almost ready. We need to add some VRChat stuff. So let's talk about chairs. We're going to go to the hierarchy. We're going to press create empty. Let's title this chairs. So these are the automatic chairs where like players can click and then it would place them in a seating position. To find that, we're going to go and search for chair, and there should be a prefab. Make sure we search in packages. There should be a prefab called VRC Chair 3. And we're not going to spend too much time on this, but if you just drag that into your scene, this will have everything for for letting the player sit in your world. We're going to take this prefab, we're going to rotate it. Let's put it on one of our chairs. We're going to put it like right here. Let's raise it up, place it to kind of match the chair, and then we don't want to see this like mesh that they've created. So we're going to select this object which has the mesh on it, and we're going to uncheck mesh renderer. Now the player can come in here, click this box, and sit on this chair. You can play with this collision, how big this collider is. But I recommend that once you place your chairs, I would recommend you placing one chair, uploading your world, and actually going and sitting in the chair to see how the player actually looks in the chair to try to get the alignment right. But that's really tedious. And also, I never use chairs in VRChat, so I never really focus too much on this. But that's chairs. I'm going to take this, put it there if you wanted. Once you have this, you can Control D to duplicate and move it to all the chairs in your world or wherever you want to have them all at. We're just going to do this one. And then I'm gonna hit this game object and I'm gonna check this off. Next we need mirrors. Let's go to the search, back to the search. Let's do VRC mirror, and you should see this VRC mirror prefab. Once again, we are searching in packages. So let's just drag that. We're gonna bring it right here. Let's rotate it and point it in the direction that we want. I'm gonna link you to another asset. So this is gonna be our high quality mirror. Here's another asset. This is from a creator named Temporal. This is found on Booth. This is the player only mirror. So when you turn on a mirror and you don't see the world at all and you just see the player, this is probably the asset that they're using. I think there's other assets, but this is the one I use. It's a free download. So if you want this will be linked below. Download that and then import this into your world, and then we'll use that as the low quality mirror. Drag it in, press import, and let that load. Once you import that, you should have this VRC player only folder, and there should be a prefab for it right here. You can see that it comes with like this UI. We're gonna rotate that and rotate it the other way so the UI is kind of pointed in your direction. This one's kind of hard to place because you don't actually see anything, but there's the mirror. We don't want this menu. We're gonna right click on this VRC player only mirror, and we're gonna go to prefab, unpack. So now it's not a prefab, and we can change this. We only want the mirror. We're gonna call this player only. Actually, let's just call it LQ mirror, and drag this up, drag it out of that prefab. Let's delete that. We don't need any of that. All right, we're gonna create a new empty game object. Right click in the hierarchy, create empty mirrors. Okay, now we're gonna take these mirrors and put them in this empty. It's important. There's a weird bug with the SDK right now is that if you select multiple mirrors at the same time, it will change your reflect layers, which we'll get to reflect layers in a second. So select each one at a time and drag it in. And let's rename the VRC mirror by pressing right click, rename, or F2. We're gonna rename this to HQ mirror. And select the LQ mirror and scale it. And I'm just going to try to match the HQ mirror. Now I can, I was going to say select both of them, but there is that bug. If I were to select both of them, this is what happens. The reflect layers all cancel out. So don't do that. To fix it, I just did Control Z. I'm going to scale both of these and try to put them in position. So let's make this like this big. And maybe scale it in the Y, and then we'll select this mirror, and I don't have a lot to go off of because I've just got this like transparent rectangle or square, and I'm just gonna try to match it to the HQ one to the best of my ability. So something like that. I think that's good. So now we need to create a way for the player to turn these on and off. To turn this off, you just select the mirror you want, go over, and you'll see there's this checkbox right here. You can click this checkbox and it will toggle off. This object is still in your world. It is just off. To turn it on, you click it. Basically, we need a way to tell the game that when the player interacts with this thing, then this checkbox turns off. And when they interact with it again, this checkbox turns on. So that's how the trigger is going to work. To do that, we're going to use a UI menu. So let's right click, create empty. We'll call this UI menu. So that's just an empty game object, and then we're going to click on this empty game object, and we're going to go all the way down to UI canvas. Now, when you bring in a canvas, it comes in as this giant rectangle because it thinks you're trying to make a menu for a video game or something. So we're going to need to change this up a bit. Let's rename this canvas to mirror canvas. And we're going to go into the inspector. We're going to change this from screen space to world space because we want it in the world. It's not like the camera's pointing at it, and it's not a menu for a game. We need it in the world, and then we need some VRChat scripts on here. So VRC UI. So this will let the player interact with it in the world. And then let's rescale this. We're going to change the position to 0, 0, 0. Let's do the width. Let's do width to like 1000 and 1000, and then we're going to rescale this by 1,000th. And now we can take this canvas and we should actually have something. Now we're going to right click on the canvas object, and we're going to go down to UI, and we're going to create a toggle. So this is a toggle button. This is how it comes in by default. We are going to take this label, so this is like the text, and we are going to delete it because we want to use the UI text mesh pro. This is going to be much better text, and we'll call this HQ mirror. And let's change the size. Let's change the width to like 500 and the height to 100. And then we can come down here, make it bold, change the font if you want. I think Roboto comes in with Protv, so we'll change it to that, and then we'll do like we'll center it a bit. And now let's make this a bit nicer. So background is, let's close the text to begin with. The check mark is the check mark. So this is going to be the object that tells the player that this button is on. It's just going to be like visually representing that this button is on. The mirror is on. Background is just the background of the button. Let's change this. We're going to hit this little button, and we're going to get a bunch of images. And if we scroll up, we should see this UI rounded. This came in with Protv too, so a lot of these assets are here because we imported Protv. So let's use them. We're going to use this UI rounded. It's a bit of a nicer image, and we're going to match. So our text, we changed it to 500 to 100. Let's change our background to be 500 to 100. And we want to center this on the object, so let's turn the text back on so now we can actually see this. And our text is white. Let's change it to black. This background, it's a bit, if you can see, it's moving the UI to the top left corner. Let's change this to be center, and then change the position to be 0, 0, and that should center it. And then the checkbox, let's do something, instead of the UI rounded, let's do UI rounded just the border. And we're going to change this to also match the width and height of the background. So 500 to 100, 500, 100. And we're going to change the color to black. And you can like barely see it. So I want to make this, let's do 0.5. 0.5 is better. And let's change the background to 0.5 as well. It's a little bit better. You could probably find better rounded border things than that, but for now we'll work with it. And this background is a bit too bright. Let's make it gray. Now you can play with the colors or play with the images you use for these UI buttons. You can go crazy with it. We're not going crazy with it. We're just going to try to make something that works here. So we'll work with this. So the top game object for this is called toggle. We're going to call this HQ toggle. And in this game object, in the inspector, this is where all the logic for turning on the mirror, turning it on and off will happen. We're going to be using the on value changed feature within Unity. We are not using Udon Sharp or anything like that, or anything with VRChat specific. When you use the on value change stuff in Unity, this will only affect players locally. You can never do globally stuff with this. If you wanted to like globally turn something on, you would have to have an Udon behavior or an Udon VRChat script here and link this on value to the Udon script. But we're not going to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this work by adding this little plus button, and we are going to say, we're going to take the HQ mirror, and we're going to say when the player hits this toggle, it's going to toggle, or when it hits it, it's going to toggle this object. That's all this says, is you click this, it changes the active state for this object. So game object set active, or set active bool. No, set active, top one. I'm trying to remember. Let's do plus. So it's turning this, it's just toggling on and off. If it was off, it's going to turn it on. If it was on, it's going to turn it off. But when you click it, I want to make sure that the low quality mirror is off. I don't want them on at the same time. So we're going to drag in the low quality mirror, and we're going to go over here, and we're going to go to game object. And instead of hitting the set active in the top one, we're going to go all the way down and do set active bool. And we're going to make sure that this is not checked on. So it's going to toggle this. If it was off, it's going to turn it on. If it was on, it's going to turn it off. And it's going to take the LQ mirror and turn it off. It's going to follow whatever this says. Let's make this also make a noise. And the way we do that is we can go to find our sound effects thing. I don't have a click sound effect in here, but you can take any sound effect you want and have it trigger when you click this button. I just dragged in a new sound effect. You could use the closing or opening door, but that would be kind of silly. I'll make sure that this file is part of the assets as well. So we're going to use this click sound effect. Let's go back to the HQ toggle. We're going to go back to the on value stuff right here. We're going to hit plus again. Well, first, actually, let's drag this click into the hierarchy. Drag this under the UI menu option. So we've got a click sound effect. We don't want this. So by dragging this in, it should add the audio source script in here by default. We're going to go all the way over here. We're going to make sure that it does not play on awake. I think for volume, 0.2 will be good for this, but for whatever you're using, you'll want to test it. We don't want it to be a 3D audio source. We want it to be 2D, so it just plays when the player clicks this. So it's in the world. It doesn't play at all until something needs to happen. So let's go back to HQ toggle. We've pressed that plus button on the on value. We're going to drag this click, drag it in, go to the function, and we're going to go to audio source, and we're going to go all the way down to play. So basically, when you click this, it will toggle the HQ mirror, it will turn off the LQ mirror, and it will play this audio clip. And that's exactly what we want. If you mess up any one of these, your button, the whole thing will probably break. So if you do this and there's nothing here, the whole thing will probably break. So just keep that in mind. Now let's do the LQ mirror. So we're going to duplicate this toggle, drag it down. Let's F2 LQ, just rename it, hit this drop down, go to the text. We can change this from HQ to LQ. And we're gonna, this just does the same thing. We just need to like flip these values or flip these objects. So instead of turning off the LQ, well, first we need to toggle the LQ on and off, and then we need to make sure it turns the HQ mirror off, and then it will play that audio clip. The next thing we want to do is that when the player hits one of these buttons, I want it to turn the other button off. I don't want them to be able to turn both of these on at the same time. That wouldn't make any sense. To do that, we're going to hit this mirror canvas, and we're going to add a new component, and we're going to call this, I think it's called toggle group. So add the toggle group component, hit this allow switch off button, and then let's go to each one of our toggles and make it a part of that group. So for every toggle that links to this group, it will be able to turn, when one toggle is turned on, it will be able to turn on all the other ones. So let's click the HQ one. It's looking for the group right now. It's none. You're going to go and you're going to drag that UI, or you're going to drag the object that has the toggle group script on it and just put it in here. And we're going to do the same thing for the other one. And now you can see one of these turns off. We actually want them both to turn off to begin with. We don't want them on. And then we are going to move this canvas to somewhere like here. Now remember, we have a collision mesh that kind of goes through here. You don't want this canvas to be in a collider, otherwise the player won't be able to click it. So be careful of that. If you're like putting UI canvases up against walls and you can't hit it for some reason, it's probably a good chance that your collider is overlapping the canvas. So let's select the HQ mirror. Remember, select both of these one at a time because there's that bug that's with the SDK right now. Let's turn off the HQ mirror, and then the LQ mirror, let's turn that off. The LQ mirror is a prefab, so it should already be set up, but the reflect layers for that are this. So layers kind of just, every object in your world is on some kind of layer, probably default, but the player in the game is on a player layer. So this kind of just tells the game how these objects interact with each other. For the LQ mirror, for this prefab, it's set up like this. This is correct. For the HQ mirror, we're going to want to change some stuff. So by default, it comes in with everything. Let's just hit nothing to begin with. And now for the HQ mirror, we want default on, which is what most objects are on. By default, when you bring stuff in, it's on the default layer. We also want player local to be on. And then we want pickup no environment to be on. Then we want mirror reflect. Mirror reflect needs to be on if the player is going to be reflected, and I think that's enough. So this should be good to go. We can test this by using client sim by pressing this little play button. So let's do that just to make sure everything works. And let's walk to where we put our mirror. Click that. The HQ mirror turns on. Hit that. the HQ mirror turns off and this one gets toggled on. And you can see our little identifier which tells the game which one's on and off, toggles between them, and everything works. Perfect. Okay, I just added some sound effects in here that we can put in the world. These will be part of the assets when you import them, but I added that you should see a fire sound effect and a cold wind sound effect. We're gonna just mess with sound effects in here. So let's right click in the hierarchy, create empty sound effect. So this is just an empty object that I renamed to help organize our hierarchy. We're going to take the cold wind sound effect. We're just going to drag it in, put it under here. This is going to be like our background noise, but you could make this 2D, but I think we're going to make it a 3D world or sound effect. And we're going to we'll just put it near spawn. If we hit this little audio button, we can turn the audio on and off. So now that the audio is on, if I get close, this is a 3D object, so when I get closer to it, it should get louder. You can kind of hear that wind. This is like background noise that's supposed to be going all the time, so let's make sure loop is selected on. And then we can toggle this on and off to kind of reset the audio in the world. And I think that's good. We're just going to keep it by the default settings. You can play with everything and then play the scene, walk around, and go in VRChat, test it out to see how you like it. For this, we're just going to keep it on default. For 3D objects in VR, or in VRChat, they recommend that you use another script called the VRC spatial audio source. So just add the script to your 3D audio sources and make sure to use the settings that you set up here. Make sure you use audio source volume, and I don't know what that says, but just hit this bottom one. So that's some background noise. Let's add the fire sound effects. Let's just drag that into the hierarchy, and this will come in with the same default stuff. We're going to want this to loop as well. It'll play on awake, and we can toggle this audio to hear that fire sound effect, and this is quite loud. Let's change this to like 0.5, and we don't need the max distance to be 500. We can make this like 6, maybe 4 is probably better. And then if you see this curve, you can see that no matter how far away you are from this object, you can see that it never goes to 0. So if we're out here, we'll still hear it. So if you want it to fade out, you're going to want to take this and drag it down, and then we'll adjust this curve a little bit. And then we can toggle this again. And the reason why it didn't fade out is because we have the spatial blend on 2D, so let's make sure it's on 3D. And now you can't hear it until you get close. And even this is a bit too loud, so we're going to do like 0.35 maybe. I just want it subtle, and then I'm going to reposition this by pressing, the object. Also, let's drag it into that sound effect game object. I'm just going to reposition it to be, right on the fire. And I don't really like it. I don't know if you can hear it through the recording, but I actually don't like being able to hear it so much. So let's change the max distance for the cold wind to like 40. Drag this also will never hit 0, so I just want to drag that bottom part down, and we'll do something like that. And then maybe we'll add another one, put it out here. That way when you're like at spawn, you hear the cold wind, and then when you leave and you come over here, you'll also hear it, just like subtly. And I think that's enough. We also want to go to the fire sound effect and add the VRC spatial audio source component and check that on. And I think that's enough for a sound effect. And the last thing I want to do is we're going to go to the assets folder. We're going to go to FBX, and we're going to bring in a pickup object. I'm going to show you how to do that. Let's find this not FBX. Let's go to prefabs. Find this hot chocolate game object. Drag this in, and this is a pickup object. So let's right click in the hierarchy, create another empty. We'll call this pickups. Just to organize all of our pickup objects, we can drag that in. And this is the only one we're going to do. By default, in this prefab, it's already set up as a pickup object, so you don't have to worry about it. There's also a particle on it. But to make any object a pickup, what you need is a box collider, or you need some kind of collider on the object itself. Then you need to add the VRC pickup script, which will add this script. So just add component, search VRC pickup, and then it will add this script, and then it will also add the rigid body script. And then you need to add another script that will let this sync between all the players. So if one player picks it up, all the players see it, and that script is called the VRC object sync script. So just type in VRC object sync, and you'll find it right there. With all these scripts on this object, this is now an object that any player can pick up and all the players will see. So let's pick up objects. The last thing we need to do is I'm going to create a UI menu for this world. To make this easy, we're going to take this mirror canvas object and we're going to press Ctrl D to duplicate, and let's rename this by calling it menu canvas. And we'll put this we'll put it in the kitchen area because that's kind of like where spawn is. Well, spawn is like way out there, but I don't know. Makes sense to put it here for some reason. In the menu canvas, let's delete this LQ mirror. We don't need it. We'll call this top one toggle, and then we can hit this drop down. We can change the text. Let's have this toggle post processing. We also no longer need this toggle group, so we can remove it. And in this toggle object, we can see now group is missing, which shouldn't affect anything, but we can get rid of it. So now instead of turning on the mirrors, we need to just turn up for this object. This is going to be the post-processing toggle. We just want it to toggle the post-processing. So we're going to take this object, drag it over, and this was set up to toggle that HQ mirror. This should now toggle this post-processing object. And also you should hear the click. Let's press Ctrl D to duplicate, drag this down. This one can be the sound effect toggle, and it's going to be the exact same thing. Find that sound effect object, drag it in, and now this toggles the sound effects. We're going to move these up, Ctrl D, duplicate, let's drag this down, and let's have this one toggle the particles, and then we'll hit this, grab particles, put it in that spot. Now it toggles particles, Ctrl D. We're going to do another one. Let's have this one toggle the chairs. Toggle, same thing, find chairs. And this one is off by default, so make sure this is on is checked off. And the other ones, I'm holding Control and selecting each one of these. These need to be on by default. And it's kind of hard to see up against the wood, but you can see the black outline now. Ctrl D, let's do one more. And this one will be the pickup toggle. So this one needs to be on by default. And then let's grab the pickups and drag it in. Same thing. And now we've got a world menu. Very simple. Let's test this by pressing this little play button. And now testing, you should be able to hear that like wind sound effect. And then we can come in, we can open this door. And this did not move, so we need to figure out why that happened. But if I click these, they should all work. Maybe it's hard to hear the sound effect toggling on and off, but if you look in the hierarchy, you can actually see the object turn on and off. Same thing with particles, chairs. This one's not working, so we need to look to see why that one's not working, and pickups is not working, so we need to figure out what's going on. Let's select this and scroll down. That's because I accidentally chairs here. I put chairs in the wrong spot and it changed my thing, so let's fix that. Like I said, there was since this doesn't have any function, it broke the whole thing, so nothing happened. So let's drag that over there, and then this needs to be the sound effect, and do the same thing for this next one. Now we also had that issue with this object not opening with the door, and the reason for that, we can see if we select this object, we can see that it's set to static. Even if there's an animation on an object, if the object is set to static, it will not move because this is on the door will open, but this object won't move because it's static. So let's make sure it's not static. Yes, change children. And if you still, when you bake, if you still want to bake lights on this object, even though it's not static, you can still do that by hitting this drop down and pressing contribute GI. Yes, change children. And so that should let you continue to, when you bake lights, to bake on it. So let's test this once again. Press play, save your thing, press play. Now clicking, the whole object opens with it, and now these toggle on and off, and the chair's on. I should see this, and now I can sit in this chair, and I think that's everything. This world is now ready to upload, so let's upload it, and then we'll do the quest version. All right, this world's done and it's ready to upload. There's some, well, I guess it's not ready to upload. There's some other things that I want to do. Let's talk about occlusion. So let's play the scene. Let's go back into testing. So we're in the client sim. If you come up here to the top right and you hit this little stats button, you should be able to see something here, batches. Batches is going to tell you how many, I don't think this is one-to-one, but it should represent how many draw calls. And draw call, you know, to keep things as simple as possible, draw calls are, you know, the more draw calls you have, the more lag you will experience. If you have real-time lights, you'll see this number shoot up. For quest people, under 300 is preferable. Right now we're at 200 and you can see things kind of move, like it changes as we move around this scene, and depending on like what we're looking at, it renders different stuff. Honestly, under 1,000 probably means you did things right. If you have a lot of objects, you'll probably have closer to 1,000. If you have a ton of objects, you'll probably have more than 1,000. If you didn't bake your lights, you'll probably have a lot more than that. Around 200, 300 is really good. So let's exit play mode. We can change this a little bit. If we go to window and go to rendering, occlusion culling, we can tell the program to not render certain objects depending on where the player is looking. To do this, we're going to keep all the default settings and we're going to hit bake. And now once that's done, it should bake occlusion for your entire scene. And if we hit the main camera, we're in visualization, so we're in the main camera right now. If we move this around, different parts of the scene will disappear depending on where the camera is. And this should have an effect on the amount of batches that you see in the world. Or no, it's not what you see, it's what's being rendered by the player. You can kind of see what the camera sees here, and then if I rotate this, things disappeared because the camera is not rendering those objects at that moment. So that's what occlusion culling does. Now you might have, depending on what these settings were, you might have issues rendering stuff through these gaps, because some of these gaps might be small enough, trick the game into thinking that it's hiding the stuff behind it. You can configure this by changing some of the settings here, or we can just like click one of these, and I forget which one it is. You can check off occluder static, I think, or occludee static. It's one of these. And that way, this won't occlude other objects. So I'm gonna select these stairs as well. And I think that will do it. I guess we'll see here in a second. Yes, change children. Oh, no, I did that wrong. Let's make sure we only select the stairs. Occluder static. And then now we've changed some occlusion settings. We need to bake again. So press bake, it'll load, it'll take 2 seconds. And now we can test this by going into play mode with client sim. And I'm just gonna walk around and see what happens. You also might have issues through the windows, so you might need to, you can see it thinks this window is occluding stuff. So we might have to change that. And it looks like it's working fine. So let's change the window settings. We'll select that window, go down, occluder static is checked off, and I believe we also want to do the same thing for this. Occluder static is checked off, and same thing for back here. Occluder static checked off, and that should be everything. So we need to rebake again, bake the occlusion. And once that's done, let's play the scene. We'll check it out one more time. And this time, let's focus to see what the stats says. So now it's about the same. For this world, it didn't really change too much. That just means it was already doing a pretty good job batching things together. But if we walk around here, you shouldn't see things pop in and out. So if you do, you'll just want to play with the settings. If you want to do more or learn more about occlusion settings, you can fine tune this stuff quite a bit. I'll link another tutorial from someone else who kind of goes over all the occlusion stuff. And it's a really good tutorial, and I always go back to that video when I need to like be reminded on occlusion. But this looks good, so this is ready to upload. Let's upload now. We shouldn't have any issues uploading, assuming we've got this VRCWorld game object in. This should have all the information VRChat needs for worlds or for setting up a new world. So let's hit this VRChat SDK, press show control panel. You should see something like this pop up. It's going to prompt you to sign in. So sign in with your VRChat account. I think you need to be a user to upload worlds, or upload worlds publicly, I think. So if you're not a user, you may not be able to upload. Regardless, go to builder, name your world. We're going to call this Christmas Cabin Tutorial, and then give a description, tutorial world. And then there's some other settings here. You can add tags. You can kind of change the settings based on what's appropriate for your world. We need to create a thumbnail for this. So we're going to just take a picture and let's do one of like the front. Let's do one like right here. And I'll press capture from scene and I can adjust the camera a little bit. Let's press use post-processing. Let's press capture. So that's our thumbnail for the world. And then we can come all the way down here. There's some information here. Let's see, found one or more UI. Oh, what it's prompting. If we go to the UI, when you're walking around, you can automatically trigger the UI navigation stuff, because by default it comes in set as navigation as automatic. You can change that by just changing it to none. You can do the same thing for all the toggles. Change the navigation to none. What else is it saying? Autofix. This is saying it's found 2D audio sources that needs this, that it recommends that it has the VRC spatial audio source. We're going to ignore it because like this click is a 2D audio source. It doesn't need spatialization and it doesn't need VR spatialization. So we're just going to ignore that. And then it has this, I don't know what that's referencing, some compression setting. Let's press autofix, why not? Oh, and this is gonna compress all my textures. So once that's done, I think that should be everything. So we can hit this little checkbox and press build and upload. This will take a second, so just let it go. And once it's done, you should be able to go into VRChat and test out your world. So we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna see if it's good. And if it's not, we will make any fixes that we need to make. Once it's done uploading, you should get this upload succeeded little icon right there. So now you can just go into VRChat, load in, and go to worlds, go to my worlds, go to uploaded, and you should see it be the first thing up there, as long as it, well, I'm assuming you don't have as many worlds uploaded as I do. So just click it and press join. Let's see, how big is this world? 6 to 8 megabytes. Join. So now we're in the world. We can now test to make sure everything works. So let's go up here, open this, turn on post-processing, sound effects. I can hear the click button. Let's turn on the world sound so you can hear it as well. And everything looks like it's working. And I turned off sound effects, but I'm gonna turn it back on so I can actually hear stuff. So I can hear the fire. Particles look good. I can see the snow. Let's go up here, video players, and I could mess with that or try to play a video, but I don't want to. Let's open this, do the mirrors work, they do. Perfect. So this world is done, except we want to upload it to Quest. So let's do that. We're back in Unity. We're gonna to do Quest, so it's more or less the exact same, but some stuff will be different. Mainly compression settings, but we'll get to it. Let's go to File, Build Settings. We're going to change our Unity build settings to the Android build. If you don't have this, you can click on it and it will probably prompt you to download the Android version of this. I recommend, you know, if you're going to upload a Quest, you're going to need to download it. So download it. But once you have that, you can click Android, press switch platform. The first time you do this, it will take a while to switch over to Unity. So just let it load, and when it's done, come back. Okay, Unity has switched over. You'll probably see something that looks kind of like this, and it's a lot, and it looks bad, but that's okay. We're gonna. The main thing that's happening here is your compression settings aren't set for Android. We're gonna need to fix that. You see all this like weird shading for all the trees, and it's basically on everything. This is the compression settings on your light map, so you're gonna want to find your light maps and change that. For us, the light maps are usually saved in this wherever your scene is. It usually creates a folder in there and puts your light maps in there. So for us, it's right here. So the Christmas cabin tutorial folder in scene, in the Christmas cabin tutorial folder that it created, and you can find your light maps for your world there. We're going to want to select both of these, and you can compress this just like textures. For Android, we're going to press override for Android, and we're going to change the format to be RGBA compressed ASTC 4x4 block, and press apply, and that fixes most of our issues. And then your terrain may or may not be really shiny. If it is, you're going to want to change the compression settings for the textures you're using on the terrain. I believe it needs to be something like RGB 24-bit or something like that, or 32-bit. It's going to increase the file size for those textures, but just know that the shininess is because of compression if you're experiencing that issue. Another thing that Quest people are going to have issues with is cutout textures. So these tree textures, they could cause some lag for Quest people, and depending on like the shaders you're using, which if you're just using like Unity Standard, it should be more or less okay. The best shader to use for this is not VRChat Standard, but VRChat, or not Unity Standard, but VRChat. Go to Mobile Standard Light. This is basically VRChat's optimized version of Unity Standard. If you wanted to, you could go through and change all your materials to be using standard light. There are better ways to do it through going through Easy Quest Switch. There's better ways to do it by going through Easy Quest Switch. So if you go here, you can add Easy Quest Switch to your scene. I guess let's go ahead and do that. So I've just added the latest version of Easy Quest Switch. If we go back here, it'll import it. Once that's done loading, you can go to Window, find Easy Quest Switch. You'll see something like this. Let's press Setup Easy Quest Switch. All we're going to do is let's select all these textures. We're going to select our material, hold Control, select all the materials you want, holding Control, and then we're going to drag all of that into here, and then you'll have all these object options in here. And we changed the one material to VRChat Mobile Standard, so we can click that and we can see that the shader file is right here. Oops, I didn't mean to open it. What we want to do, so your right column is your quest and your PC column is the left side. We want to change the shader to be standard light. So we're going to just move Mobile Standard into here. And we're going to only do this for the standard because they will change one-to-one. So the Autodesk Interactive, we're going to keep the same. This one. So just go down here, change all the standards to VRChat Mobile Standard Light. This is just a recommendation. You don't have to do this, by the way. And then we're going to go to Settings, Force Apply Quest Settings, and that should change all the materials. And now we have to deal with the cutout textures. The trees aren't like having so many of them is going to be bad. So we want to change this. So let's create a quest version of the terrain. And this is going to require us to rebake lights because we're going to basically create an entirely new terrain. So let's select this terrain object, press Control D to duplicate, and we're going to call this terrain quest. And let's toggle off the main terrain. And you can see there's no lights on this now because this is a brand new object. One thing to note is that every terrain will link to a terrain data. If you were to make changes on this terrain, it will affect this terrain as well. So we need to make a new terrain data. So let's select this. We can find where this terrain is, and we can press Control D and duplicate this. And we'll just call the whole thing quest. Let's go back to our terrain quest. Let's make sure that this terrain data links to the quest. And it's going to give us a warning. It says the terrain data used by the terrain collider component is different from this terrain. So we need to change this terrain. And the way to do that, you're going to want to go up to this inspector tab icon. You're going to right click and we're going to change this from normal mode to debug mode. Debug mode, you can see what terrain data this terrain uses. We need to make sure that it uses the quest terrain. So let's go back to normal mode, right click on there, normal. And now we can go to paint trees, change our brush size, and we can shift and click and start deleting a lot of these trees. And the more we get rid of, the better quest will probably run. And it stinks that you have to get rid of detail for the quest people, but you know, it kind of is what it is. The coloring you're seeing on the trees though is from, I think that's from the bake, or maybe it's a reflection. I'm actually not sure. We'll rebake and see what happens. It might be the compression of the leaves itself. So maybe if I find that leaf texture, maybe we can change this. Maybe we're losing a lot of data. Maybe we'll change the compression settings, and that did nothing. I don't know. We'll bake. We'll see if we can fix it. But let's just keep going through this, getting rid of some of these details. And I think that's enough. So go ahead, because this is a new object, we're going to want to rebake. Let's go to lighting and press generate lighting and let this load. And that's done loading. Let's go back to the easy quest switch. We're going to go window, easy quest switch. And since we've now got two terrain objects, we're going to, let's drag in the terrain quest. We're going to make sure when we're on quest that it's checked on, and let's drag the normal terrain, and we're going to make sure that when we're on PC it's checked on. So now when you go to file, build settings, and switch back to Windows, it'll make all these changes for you automatically and you won't have to deal with it. But lights are baked now. You can see we're getting some artifacts again. We're going to recompress the light maps. So let's go back to that scenes folder. Oops. Let's make sure we're in the right folder. Scenes, Christmas. And let's select that. Inspector. And we can see in the lighting tab, we can see that this is an 8 megabyte lighting file. So in here we can double check or override for Android, change it to that RGBA compress ASTC 4x4 block, apply, and that gets rid of a lot of those artifacts for us. Some other things that the players might have issues with is particles, so you could choose to turn this off by default. On quest, post-processing doesn't work, so we can turn that off by default because it's not going to work anyways. And then we could maybe toggle off the post-processing toggle, so I mean, it's not going to work anyway, so what's the point of the players even seeing it? And then there's other things you can do to help optimizing on quest, but most of your issues are going to come from needing to compress textures for file size, and you could remove some objects, but our batches, I'm pressing play to test this again, our batches are under 300 already, so you probably don't need to do much more. The main issues for this world is going to be these cutout textures and the particles and stuff like that. That's going to affect the player way more. And you can see that by getting rid of a lot of those trees, we've actually cut down the batches by about 40 at spawn. So walking around. So this probably means you might want to bake occlusion again, but you probably don't have to. If you're getting weird things popping in and out, you may want to, but it doesn't seem like it's necessary for this. But for the quest world, I think what we just did here is enough to upload for quests. So we are going to go and upload this again. So if we go to that VRChat world game object, if we come to the pipeline manager, you'll notice now that it's not empty. Now it has a world. This is like your serial number for your world. If you upload to the same blueprint ID, it will upload as the quest version. I don't know how true this is now, but in the past it was really important to make sure your hierarchy matches. So I always try to make sure that I didn't change anything in the hierarchy. Now we've added a second terrain quest, which could mess up sync, but there's only one object syncing in here, so it's not really a big deal. But I guess just as an FYI, if your pickup objects aren't syncing between players or everything's kind of weird, make sure your hierarchy matches between the Windows upload and the Android upload. So let's go to VRChat SDK, show control panel, and we're just going to hit this check marks. Everything should be the same. And we're going to press, there's some more stuff here saying there's some unsupported shaders. It's giving us that audio warning again. This is just all shader stuff. And these are shaders I've used before, so I know that they'll be fine. It's just kind of warning you, like, these aren't recommended shaders to use. Basically, if you're not using just the VRChat mobile shaders, it's going to warn you about it. So we're going to ignore that. We're going to press build and upload. And now it's uploading our Android version. And with that, I think that's it for this world. We're not going to test the Android version on here because I got to go into my quest and test it out, but I'm going to assume that everything's working properly. If it's not, then I'll just cut from here to me making the fixes. But other than that, this world is basically done. We went through everything. We modeled this whole thing out and went through the whole process, and that's basically it. The process we went through this tutorial is the exact same I do on every world. So maybe you're not building a Christmas world, but the process through building this is the exact same. If you need help with anything, you can reach out. My Discord is in the description. And with that, I think that's it. Bye.